Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto has Rinnegan and Sharingan of Sasuke part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. Valley of the End, year 78. Naruto, the young black-haired gray-skinned man, shouted out at the entity approaching him. Sasuke, the now dubbed Naruto, who was cloaked in a fiery three-tailed crimson fox-like cloak, shouted back. The two rushed forward before exchanging a myriad of powerful punches, kicks, and other attacks with blades. After dancing around each other and testing their opponent's defense, the two charged a quick Rinnegan and Chidori before rushing at each other and clashing in a burst of white light. Shooting backward out of the smoke, the two 12-year-old boys directed their chakra to their feet before righting themselves so that they could stare at their counterparts. "Sasuke, if you stop this right now and come back to the village, then I'm sure all of this can be forgiven," Naruto growled. "After all, you are their precious little Uchiha prince who can do no wrong." A small spiteful part of his mind thought. "That's not going to happen, Naruto. I need more power so I can kill Itachi. Meanwhile, Konoha is unable to provide me with the power. So I will go somewhere I can get that power." Sasuke responded in a scalding and baleful tone. "Unable to give you more power? How much has that mark messed with your head, Sasuke? You are being personally trained by our sensei, and if you so much as asked for it, the village would probably hand you all of its techniques. Yet you are abandoning it while saying you have nothing to gain from the village." Naruto could barely restrain his anger at this point. Sasuke, who was given practically everything he wanted and was even taught personally by their sensei, was complaining about not having the opportunity to gain more power and throwing it all away. Gritting his teeth, he charged up the strongest Rinnegan he had ever used and was preparing to end this fight, consequences be damned. While one held a rapidly spinning purple orb floating wildly just above his clawed hand, the other hand his hand coated in a bolt of pitch black lightning with white outlines. Rushing toward each other, the two pulled back their arms before pumping as much chakra as they could spare into their jutsus before throwing themselves and their arms forward in an awe-inspiring clash. As soon as their jutsu met, a dome of ethereal darkness and pure holy-like white spread out, covering almost the entire part of the canyon in which the two boys were fighting. While inside the dome, the young black-haired boy named Sasuke had to close his eyes as he was unable to keep his eyes open due to all the chakra flowing around them so wildly. This was a benefit to Naruto as he could still barely keep his eyes open to see out of them. Looking forward towards Sasuke, Naruto faintly saw black cracks or tears, he couldn't tell what they were. However, he became extremely concerned as he saw the cracks expand to the point where they could probably swallow up one of Kakashi's ninja hounds. At that moment, his and Sasuke's attacks finally gave out and a massive explosion ripped out, intending to throw the two far away from each other. However, before Naruto could fly even 15 feet, his entire vision was overcome with darkness before it was replaced with a disgusting semi-damp sour. "Naruto, you stupid ninja, do you even realize what you have done?" Naruto heard a deep growl emanating from the golden bars to his left. "Ah, what are you talking about now, Kyuubi?" the blonde boy muttered in annoyance. "You foolish ninja." The now dubbed Kyuubi bellowed as he stepped forward to let his form be seen. "You have torn open a hole between realms. If not for the fact that time flows so slowly here that it might as well have stopped, you would have already been pulled into the tier behind you and died without knowing what happened." While normally Naruto would not put too much importance on Kyuubi's words, these words caused him to shoot upwards and look towards the fox in shock. "What do you mean I would have died before I even realized it? How do I survive? Can I get away from the crack?" Out of concern, Naruto rapidly shot out questions, completely forgetting that the Kyuubi wasn't precisely his biggest supporter. "Will you shut up, boy? Believe me, I have no desire to die, but I also have no desire to help you. So what will I get in return for helping you?" the odd-looking fox questioned. "What do you want?" Naruto quickly responded. "Freedom," came the calm growl. "I would rather just take more of your power and save myself," Naruto growled in annoyance. His expression slowly sank as he did not see the familiar anger at such words, but instead saw a smug grin on the fox's face. "That's just it, boy, even if you take all 9 tails worth of my power, you still can't save yourself. The only way for you to save yourself is if you completely absorb this version of chakra and some of my primordial chakra," the Kyuubi said. "Primordial chakra?" Naruto questioned. "You honestly have no business knowing of it, but this is probably the only way to make you understand. It's quite simple. The Biju, each one is signified by the number of tails, and that decides the strength and ranking of the Biju, but contrary to popular belief this wasn't completely true, as their tails only signifies how much primordial chakra, or the original form of chakra, is stored in their souls. Each Biju's body is made completely of elemental affiliated nature energy. Thus, depending on where they are, someone like the Ichibi might be able to put up a fight against me, if only slightly, whereas it could be completely decimated by the Sanbi if in another place. It all depends on what the natural energy in the air is most affiliated with. Kiri is water, Kumo is lightning, and so on. Whereas primordial chakra is the foundation of their souls and can seldom increase or decrease in the total amount. The only other way for one to gain more primordial chakra is to fight, win and take your opponents. Of course, only those with primordial chakra can take the primordial chakra of others. The great beast explained. I will impart on you part of my primordial chakra and in turn, you will free this half of me so my soul can go and join my other half. This will give you the ability to survive in the gap for a few minutes, which should be long enough. Naruto struggled to find an answer for the beast before his shoulders eventually slumped and he agreed to the beast's request. Quickly Naruto felt his soul seemingly change as it became sturdier and seemingly more ancient. Since the Kyuubi completed its part of the deal and let him know how to control and assimilate the left-behind chakra, Naruto went up to pull off the tag. In the middle of pulling it off, Naruto suddenly recoiled, fully taking the tag with him as a surge of info forced its way into his head. His heritage, sealing knowledge, his parents' techniques and styles, and other miscellaneous information. Ahahaha, you foolish ninja, you have made the worst choice you could have ever chosen. While I maybe become weaker in the long run, the consequences for you are far more dire, the Kyuubi bellowed out. Stuttering, Naruto demanded an explanation while trying to stop the gates from opening. While you will survive in the gap, you won't be able to re-enter this realm unless you have the help of some other being or anchors like your father's technique. Though if it makes you feel any better, at least I won't go out of my way to attack your stupid village as it's too much work. Naruto was sadly unable to do anything as the Kyuubi's spirit slipped out of the cage and his body to go find his other half and reform in a quite uncivilized area. Unable to do anything, Naruto was booted out of his mindscape so that it could attempt to fix itself as its main job had abruptly ended. Amity muttered weakly before his vision was overtaken by darkness. The gap between realms, year 78. Floating in the gap, Naruto was unable to do anything. His legs, arm, and practically every other body part were burning in excruciating pain from the transformation the primordial chakra was doing to his chakra coils. On top of the pain coursing through his every nerve, his head felt like someone was trying to chop it in half with a blunt, rusty axe that hadn't been used in years. His mouth opened in an attempt to express his pain, yet nothing came out from his strained vocal cords. This was a result of his psyche slowly collapsing in on itself, as what was once practically the bottom-most layer of his psyche was now empty due to the Kyuubi's escape. Originally, due to the Kyuubi being sealed inside him mere moments after his birth, his subconscious had developed in a way that the seal and Naruto's subconscious had developed to where if one ceased to exist, like what was happening now, the other would slowly crumble away, resulting in his mind crumbling and him dying. After suffering through this for what felt like hours, a faint flicker appeared at the edge of his vision, not that Naruto could process anything in the state he was in. Slowly the ethereal darkness started to move before a figure seemingly stepped through the infinite and appeared at Naruto's side. The figure was tall, easily 6'1", maybe taller. He had long black hair with slivery white strands randomly mixed in. His hair was so long that it reached his ankles, with two strands being braided and meeting in the middle, joining into one braid and stopping just above his ankle. His skin was as white as snow with a sharp jaw and a warm temperament. However, the oddest fact without a doubt was the fact that this figure seemed incorporeal, like a specter or wraith. Golden eyes slowly trailed the young boy's body as the eyes showed obvious confusion at the boy's pain. How odd, he is covered in wounds, yet the pain he seems to be experiencing stems from none of them. The figure muttered to himself as he leaned forward enough so that he could rest his nearly see-through hand against the poor boy's head. I see, his subconscious seems to have two different parts, somewhat like sacred gear users. He muttered more quietly than before. His expression showed confusion before it slowly sank into a terrifyingly cold expression. If there were any other beings around, they would have no doubt been trembling in fear from the specter's expression and the aura he was radiating. It's like someone forcefully ripped out what was in the second part of his consciousness. At this rate, he could very well die in a manner more painful than anything else. Now trembling in anger, his aura was seeping into the realm like an ocean breaking through a dam, but with this increase in aura, his figure started to fade even faster than before. Who in the world could do this to a child? Sighing deeply, the figure slowly brought his hand from the boy's chest to his right arm, letting his fingers trail down the boy's arm as mysterious, incomprehensibly complex runes were left on his arm. Oh well, I was going to fade away soon anyways, I might as well help this boy as a final good deed. Who knows, maybe fate brought this boy to me for the sole purpose of continuing my legacy. Pausing for a moment, the rapidly fading wraith laughed at that thought. Before bringing his hand to the boy's chest and pumping in the rest of his magical power to make it so the boy could use the gift he left him. I always defied and went against fate while refusing to believe in it. Now I'm wondering if you were brought here by fate. Oh, how far I've fallen. Haha, well, now that it's all ending to you, young man, I leave my legacy, make sure to use it well. The authority. And with those words, he pushed the boy out of the dimensional gap and into the world in which he came from, and to the person who he believed would best be able to understand the boy's importance and the power he wielded. A world filled with war and chaos, a world where the boy's new power would be able to grow best. Valley of the End, Year 78. Slowly standing up, Sasuke could do nothing but stare in shock at the area where Naruto once was, while he was unable to keep his eyes open in the dome. The moment it started to fade, Sasuke's eyes shot open with so much chakra flowing into them that he was able to watch in slow motion as a vile red chakra shot out of Naruto before disappearing into thin air, leaving only a burst of menacing malicious laughter behind. If that wasn't enough, immediately after he watched as Naruto vanished into a semi-large black crack tear in reality. Sasuke must have stood there for 10 to 15 minutes, ignoring even the blindingly hot pain in his eyes, before he was snapped out of his thoughts as three figures appeared. The two who landed at his side were Orochimaru and Kabuto, whereas the one who landed across from him was Kakashi and Pakken. "Sasuke. Where is Naruto?" The silvery white-haired Jonin questioned as he saw only one of his students standing in the valley. He intended to ask more questions before he froze as he saw his student's new eyes. "Now Haddock-san, I doubt the current whereabouts of the Kyuubi Jinchuriki are too important. He probably just floated down the river. I'm sure you can find him quite easily, at least you should be able to find his body quite easily." Originally Orochimaru was planning on having Kabuto stall Kakashi while he took Sasuke away, but quickly changed that plan after seeing his new protege's eyes and knowing exactly what they symbolized. Realizing what must have happened, Orochimaru simply couldn't pass up the chance to taunt the copy nin. However, he regretted it almost immediately as he saw Kakashi's already revealed Sharingan morph into an odd kunai-shaped pattern. Knowing what was about to come, he quickly shouted for Kabuto to take Sasuke away as he prepared to fight Kakashi. He was surprised to see Kakashi's Mangekyou Sharingan slowly fade back into the normal Sharingan as he directed a hurt, disappointed, and faintly disgusted gaze at his student, no doubt because Sasuke had broken the one rule Kakashi placed over everything else just to gain a little more power. "I can see now that you truly have no intention of returning to Konoha. Then I will say this now in place of the Hokage Sasuke Uchiha, last scion of the Uchiha clan, from this moment forward, for siding with an enemy of Konoha, purposely luring your fellow ninja into a trap and murdering one of your peers, your teammate no less, you are hereby declared an enemy of Konoha with a capture or kill if you attempt to resist an order placed on you. If you ever step into Konoha or any allied territory, it will be seen as a declaration of war and you will be hunted down and purged. This is your only warning." Even while speaking the words in an indifferent and apathetic voice, saying such thing to one of his students still broke Kakashi ever so slightly, bringing back the man that had just seen both his teammates, his sensei, and the closest thing he had to a mother die while he could do nothing to help. While normally Kakashi would not have the power to declare such a thing, this was an exceptional circumstance that gave him the power to declare such a thing. The first was that Tsunade, the acting Hokage, had permitted him if he saw fit, and the second was the damage Sasuke had caused, knowingly or not. Next was the murder of a fellow Konoha ninja, which was never taken lightly. The fact Naruto was the Jinchuriki just made it all the worse, and the final biggest part had to do with who Naruto truly was, as the sole heir to the Namikaze and Uzumaki lineage. What could have benefited the village greatly was now forever out of their reach, as was the hope of raising the perfect successor to the Yandam Hokage. Casting one last disappointed gaze at his student, Kakashi turned on his heel before shooting toward the village, dreading the conversion he was going to have with Tsunade and the clan head that were aware of who Naruto was and cared greatly for him. That wasn't even mentioning Jiraiya, who was no doubt going to want to go on a warpath against Orochimaru and Sasuke. Sighing deeply, he steeled his will and prepared to face what could very well be the sparks that start the next great ninja war. "I don't know if you are truly dead, Naruto, somehow, I doubt it, but whatever you do, stay alive. I won't stop looking for you until I find you or find confirmation that you have truly fallen." Unknown Valley, Year 2013. Walking lazily through one of the outer regions of the Grigori, Azazel, the leader of the biblical faction's fallen angels, was whistling a happy tune as he strolled across the lush green plains. He was in quite a good mood on that day. For what felt like the first time in forever, he felt the familiar aura of his old friend, or at least someone he considered an old friend. He wasn't quite sure of the mage god's opinion when it came to him. Though it couldn't be that bad if he had sent what could only be his potential heir right to the spatial equivalent of his doorstep. Walking to the side of a river, he looked down into the shallow crater to see a young blonde-haired boy that lacked any form of clothing on his upper body, while most of the clothing from his knees down was in tatters. On the boy's right shoulder down to the middle of his forearm was an archaic-looking tattoo that seemed to be multi-dimensional. Just staring at it for a few moments would cause most people to experience painful headaches and even suffer damage if they tried to understand just what the tattoo was. Though, Azazel paused as he quickly noticed that it wasn't only a domineering power that seemed to make the magic around them submit to him that was rolling off of him, but also something that he had become increasingly familiar with over the past few years, chakra. But looking, Azazel was able to quickly confirm that the boy held no traces of yokai blood in him. How odd, he thought as his lips curled into an interested smile. It appears you have given me quite an interesting present today, Mage God Merlin. Konoha Council Chambers, Year 78. Kakashi couldn't help but slightly sweat under the murderous infuriated stares that were directed at him and the oppressive silence that permeated the room. He and Shikamaru, who was in a semi-alright condition, had just finished recounting the information that he was aware of from the moment the small group left to track down Sasuke to Kakashi confronting Sasuke, Orochimaru, and Kabuto in the Valley of the End. This of course included the news of Naruto Uzumaki's demise, which was all but confirmed by Sasuke's awakening of the Mangekyou Sharingan. Are you sure of Uzumaki-san's death, Kakashi? Did you find his body? The current head of the Nara clan and the Jonin commander, Nara Shikaku, asked the last student of Minato Namikaze. His voice was tinted with a coldness that the other occupants in the room had not heard since the Third Great Ninja War. While I was not able to locate his body, I do know just how one activates a Mangekyou Sharingan, so either Sasuke directly killed Naruto, and I was unable to find his body, due to Kabuto and Orochimaru being there. Naruto is alive, but in such a bad state that Sasuke believes there is no feasible state that he can survive. Or Sasuke dealt a killing blow, but unknown to him, Naruto was able to survive while making Sasuke think he died. However, the last theory is highly unlikely as Sasuke would have been able to spot any inconsistency that Naruto could have tried to create. I see, I think it is best that we keep this quiet for a few days and not let anyone know, with the exception of Master Jiraiya, as he can help look for him if we are unable to find anything by the end of the month, or if Naruto Uzumaki does not return, then we should consider him dead and prepare to track down the Kyuubi no Kitsune and reseal it. The head of the Hyuga clan, Hiashi Hyuga, calmly suggested. While we can confirm if the boy is dead, we will have to wait until we start to see signs of the Kyuubi reforming, which will take a minimum of 4 years to see the beginning signs and 5 to 6 for it to fully reform. Until such a time we should secretly make preparations, as we cannot show any signs of weakness. If we do, we will without a doubt be attacked. While doing so, we can keep it hidden by saying that Uzumaki-san has gone on a training trip with Lord Jiraiya, which will allow him to look for Naruto while moving around freely. Shikaku supported. For now, we will focus on keeping Naruto's disappearance from getting out. Tsunade finally spoke. Despite the emotional turmoil swirling in her head, she kept her voice perfectly even. If anyone learns of this outside of the people in this room, then we will know we have a traitor amongst us, and they will be rooted out and exterminated. She brought her eyes up and swept her gaze over everyone in the room before sighing. Kakashi, I plan on taking Sakura on as an apprentice due to her potential with medical ninjutsu. Since you don't have any students to teach, for now, I would like you to rejoin Anbu and lead a group of your choosing. You can bring new members in, or you can choose existing Anbu members, but be prepared as I want you to work damage control. Do you understand? Normally such a request would be made in private, but Tsunade did not have that luxury right now. Yes, Hokage-sama, Kakashi replied. Alright, everyone is dismissed. I will send a letter to my teammate and see when he can get her, then we will reconvene. And with that, she stood up and headed to her office. Pausing, she looked out one of the hallway windows and gazed down at the village. Don't you worry, you stupid brat, no matter what I will make sure this village is operating smoothly for when you return to take this hat for yourself. With a small smile, she sat down at her desk and started to write the letter that she knew would cause her old teammate so much sorrow and pain. Unknown residence, Year 78. Ugh, my head hurts. These were the first thoughts that appeared in Naruto's mind as he slowly cracked his eyes open, only to be besieged by what had to be one of the brightest lights he had ever had the displeasure of looking directly into. Almost immediately after his eyes opened shut, while his expression warped in pain, though not before noticed the odd silver, gold, and green trails of flickering lights floating like rivers around the area he was able to see in front of him and his peripheral vision. Oh, you're awake, I thought you had already died. An apathetic and faintly annoyed voice sounded out from Naruto's side. If he had to guess, the person was sitting 10 to 12 feet away from him, and from the ever so subtle creaking, Naruto guessed he was sitting on a chair. Though none of that mattered, as all that ran through Naruto's head was to jump up and prepare to defend himself, if only he remembered the big bright light that was right above his head. Bang fuck, Naruto shouted as he tumbled off the bed and writhed in pain while he clutched his head. It felt like someone had cut open his head. It definitely hurt, but wasn't the most painful thing he had experienced, having a Chidori clip the outermost edge of your heart and lung. PFFTE. The other occupant obviously found quite a bit of amusement in the situation, if his stifled laughs were anything to go by. Lifting his head, he turned his head to glare at the boy sitting in the cushioned chair, idly taking note of his appearance. Light silver hair that fell to around his neck slightly spiked towards the left, and hazel eyes. He looked to be around 13 to 14 years old. He was wearing a loosely buttoned shirt with blue jeans and small silver chains hanging from around his belt. He wore a haughty and superior expression that was currently tinged with amusement, though his expression froze, and he tensed up almost immediately after he was pinned by Naruto's glare. How odd, that's a new reaction. My instincts are screaming not to underestimate him, yet he got scared so easily. Naruto's glare softened into one more of confusion than anger. Who are you? Naruto questioned after lowering his hands from the top of his head after the pain slowly started to fade. Yet the boy did not respond. After seemingly controlling his fear by shrouding himself in a bluish-white aura, he narrowed his eyes dangerously, though he still tensed when Naruto's glare lost the confusion at the sign of blatant hostility. Yufufu, now you two, why don't you both stop glaring at each other and introduce yourselves? An amused genial voice. Standing in the doorway was a tall 20-something-year-old man with black hair, golden bangs, and a small black goatee. He wore a casual V-neck shirt and black jeans with no shoes, the perfect appearance of someone who was relaxing at home. Oh, first dear boy, please cut the flow of mana towards your eyes and volley, release Albion's aura, it's killing some of my mana-based plants. He said in a slightly more serious tone. Mana? Naruto questioned, having never heard the word before. Ah, right, how could I forget, you're not from this world. Do you know how to control your chakra? Azazel questioned. After getting a nod of affirmation, he instructed the boy to look inside and reach out towards the second form of energy and stop its flow like he would normally do with his chakra. Complying with the man's oddly hypnotic voice, Naruto closed his eyes and pulled back on the strange energy that he had never felt before. It was only after he cut off his chakra and mana, he supposed it was called, that Naruto saw the strange rivers of light disappear from his vision. Who are you? Where am I? What do you mean by you're not from this world? How do I get home? Naruto, not being the most subtle person, decided to just ask his questions instead of trying to lightly dance around the question. Well, first, you can't go back to your home, at least I don't know how to send you home. You are in my house located in the Grigori. Third, you were sent here by an old friend of mine. As to why he did that, well, that's a whole nother conversation. As for who I am, his smile grew a little mincing as his eyes narrowed in dark amusement. I am the Governor-General of the Grigori and the leader of the Fallen Angel faction, Azazel, and of course, I'm also a fallen angel. And with those final words 12 raven-like wings that seemed to be the very personification of darkness burst out from his back as Naruto reeled back in shock and terror. Oh yeah, and he's Volley Lucifer. And the man quickly switched back to that childish joy as he introduced his companion. Garden of Ruin 2 years later, year 2015. She could see why he enjoyed being in the garden so much. While the flowers were mostly muted, being primarily cooler dark colors, they still held an oddly entrancing beauty. Plus the smell of all the flowers was not too overpowering and was instead just right due to an odd magic that she had never bothered with learning or asking too much about. It didn't seem important considering she was mostly an ice magic user due to her longiness. The feeling of the sun softly beating down on her as it sat at the peak of its arc and the nice spring weather was made for a wonderful day out of the manner that Azazel owned. Unconsciously her steps slowed down, mostly to enjoy the smells and sights and also to not disrupt the nap of the person she was asked to come and retrieve. He is always napping around here when he's free, despite his talk of wanting to return home. She thought in an amused manner as she sped up her steps after remembering why Azazel wanted her to find him. She smiled slightly as the medium-sized gazebo in which her friend always slept came into view. It was a dark ashy gray made of solid marble with a roof having obsidian-colored shingles sitting on top. She walked until she could make out the inside of the gazebo before her steps abruptly stopped as she came upon a scene that she rarely saw. Sitting upright with multiple papers spread all over the table in front of him was the boy that she had almost immediately became good friends with due to his bright and easygoing personality. While he was initially brash and loud, having spent 2 years alongside Volley, and his dislike for loud things had caused the boy to tamper down and become much softer. He was leaning forward with his eyes closed as he massaged his forehead. His bright golden hair fell to around the middle of his neck, while his left bang had been cut, his right one had grown out a bit and had been braided by her the previous morning. He was still wearing that odd green gemstone around his neck with a small black leather band keeping it in place. By now he had stopped constantly wearing that headband or holding it on his person. He was wearing a simple black shirt with Japanese symbols on the back, supposedly some mythological proverb though she didn't know. Paired with the shirt were basic black jeans with small tiers on the knees and below and a silver belt wrapped around his waist. She quickly got out of her confusion before arriving behind him and leaning forward to look over his shoulder at the papers he was reading and writing on. Good morning, Lavinia, do you need something or are you here to enjoy the garden with me? The blonde teen asked in a warm voice as he slightly turned his head to gaze at what could be considered one of his closest friends. Well, that does sound quite nice. Azazel sent me to come and bring you to him, something about a contract job I believe. Lavinia responded. Anyways Naru, what exactly are you working on? It looks quite complex. Lavinia leaned over more to get a better look at what her friend was working on, in the process depending over so much that her friend had to support her so she wouldn't fall over. However, it wasn't too hard for her to look over him as she was still 2 to 3 inches taller than him. It's part of the memories my father left in the 8 trigram seal for me to obtain. It's called Highschool, a special spatial manipulation chakra technique that focuses more on the user than the surrounding area, allowing for one to traverse entire planets, and maybe, upon mastery of the technique, even dimensions if they have a mark already set up. Naruto explained to the blonde-haired girl who had draped herself over him in an attempt to get a better look at the papers laid out before him. Oh, that sounds quite useful, Lavinia gasped before expressing her amazement. What if you can figure out this technique and master this technique? Does that mean you will be able to return to your original dimension? Lavinia questioned while being one of 4 people who were fully aware of Naruto being from a different world and what that world was like. Revealing a rueful smile Naruto voiced conveyed his obvious disappointment. Sadly no, as I do not have a mark set up in my world, nor am I able to use the marks my father left due to the changes brought about by the authority and the primordial chakra that came from the Kyuubi, Naruto responded as his eyes dimmed ever so slightly. I see. She said quietly as she gently wrapped her arms around his neck in a comforting hug before resting her chin on his head as she started to smile. Then again, it's not all bad, as we both know Azazel will hound you to take him to your world due to his curiosity, and from what I know of your 2 teachers, we don't need the 3 of them to ever meet if at all possible. She could feel her friend laugh as his shoulders shook, even if he was partially succeeding in suppressing it. I agree, that sounds like a disaster in the making. Anyways, you said the crow wants to see me. I guess it's best not to keep him waiting for too long. Feeling Lavinia's weight leave him, he stood up before stretching his interlocked hands above his head and hearing and feeling his back crack before sighing in relief. Swiping his hand above the desk, he relied on a combination of sealing techniques left behind by his mom and the authority to use minor dimensional magic to store the absurd amount of practical and theoretical theories that he barely understood. You've been here for a while? Lavinia asked as she heard the concerning pop of her friend back. While he looked fine, that pop did not sound fine. Yeah, I arrived a little before sunrise considering this was my day off and I knew you and Volley were going to be busy. I wanted to watch the sunrise and get work done on all the theories, even if I can't use it to get home, it will still be a useful technique to be able to use. Naruto responded before he started talking about using Hiration, upon which there was a childish glee that appeared in his eyes. I see, well make sure you don't tire yourself out too much. Well, I know your immense chakra and magic which gives you an almost endless amount of energy, the keyword in that sentence is almost. Plus constantly forcing yourself to sit down and study so much is extremely taxing on your mind and only wears you down quicker. Lavinia giggled at his childish side when it came to fancy techniques, before quickly turning to scolding him gently, much like a sister with one of her siblings, much like she does with everyone else. Alright. I'll dial it back a bit when I get back to studying the note. Naruto responded as he held his hands up in a placating manner, knowing there was nothing he could do to get out of being scolded or worrying her, as it was simply part of Lavinia's personality. Anyway, let's go find the perverted crow before he gets sucked back into one of his science experiments or gets himself into trouble by doing something stupid. Quickly hopping over the railing in the gazebo, Naruto landed next to Lavinia before the two started chatting about their days so far as they walked back to the manor. Azazel's manor. Yes, Volley, I know you don't have any interest in hunting strays down, and I don't have much of a desire to help the devils, but when the strays start to harm the people under the protection of the fallen, then it becomes an entirely different situation. We need to deal with this as quickly as possible. Naruto had to admit this was a situation that he rarely came across. Not only was Volley annoyed, which wasn't all that rare, but Azazel looked genuinely annoyed with his silver-haired charge, which was exceptionally rare, considering Azazel never got annoyed at the two of them. Ah, perfect Naruto, you're finally here. Azazel seemed to brighten up as he saw his second charge. No doubt hoping he could convince Volley to go along with whatever stupid plan he was cooking up this time. Thank you for getting him for me, Lavinia. Now come on, you two sit down and I will explain what I need Naruto and Volley to do while letting Lavinia go over the next mission for her team. The mixed-haired man said as he beckoned the two latecomers to sit at the table where Volley was glaring at Azazel from, while Shemhazai stood by Azazel's side with that bored and annoyed look on his face. Toby had already informed me that the time to leave had moved up, so I need to head out immediately if I still want to make it on time for the briefing, Lavinia responded to Azazel's invitation. Oh, if the departure time had been moved up you could have told me and I would have sent Volley or Shemhazai to fetch Naruto. The leader of the Grigori said in slight concern that she wouldn't make it. While he wasn't worried for the Slash-Dog team, as he knew few teams could match them, he was worried that Lavinia missing might cause their flow to be a little disrupted. You need not worry, Azazel, as I still have some time to get there. Plus I don't mind spending time chatting with Naruto, which our walks allow us to do. Lavinia responded with a warm smile. Alright, well I won't take up any more of your time, Azazel said as he led Lavinia to the door before opening it for her. Please do make sure to drop by and inform me of the mission details after the job is done. After hearing her confirmation and seeing her walk away, Azazel closed the door before heading back to sit at the head of the table so that he could fill in Naruto and Volley on the contract he was planning on sending them on. While he was fully confident in Volley's might and skill, he was still a little worried when it came to his second student as he had only been learning how to wield the authority for a little over 2 years. While he had a good grasp over the first branch anarchy, it still worried the 12-winged angel slightly as any being too much stronger would be able to almost completely nullify most of anarchy's strength, though the natural domination that the authority had would help the boy greatly. Unable to do anything about it for now, Azazel pushed those concerns to the side as he looked at the two and began to explain their contract. Somewhere in the southern parts of Romania 2 days later, after 2 annoying days of being locked up in a plane as they flew from one of the entrance points to the Grigori to Romania, Naruto, Volley, and a fallen angel who was tasked with guiding them around while ensuring that everything went well, her name was Amelia and was a 6-winged fallen who directly served under Shemhazai. Currently, they were in a small rural area where a relatively annoying vampire-devil hybrid was hiding while feasting on passing beings, including Grigori informants. Currently, Amelia was explaining what it was that Azazel had wanted them to do here, while also giving Naruto a slightly more in-depth explanation of the devils, fallen, and angels. Alright, Naruto started. From what I can tell, after the Great War between the 3 races, they were all pushed so close to extinction that they were forced to halt the war out of the desire to preserve their races. Later, after the new Satans took control, the Satan that took up the name of Beelzebub created the evil peace system, which was basically just a chess game capable of turning other races into hybrid devils so as to bolster their numbers. Following that was the angels, who have the brave saint system, which is the same but is related to card decks. Yet for some reason, despite Azazel's impressive knowledge and genius, the fallen does not have a similar system. Naruto finished repeating what he had been told. Correct, though Lord Azazel could without a doubt make a similar system if he so desired, he is too wrapped up in his own pride and desires to prove himself to not be inferior to the creator by creating his own version of the sacred gears that can match or even surpass the original Longinus to be bothered with it. Amelia's warm and soft voice reverberated through the air around them, seemingly both material and ethereal at the same time. Her voice seemed to have an almost hypnotic effect that caused one to instinctively lower their guard and be at ease in her presence. This was what earned her the moniker, Fallen of Serenity. I see. Naruto muttered, not all that surprised at the Governor General's reasons for not trying to develop something like the evil peace system or brave saint system. Though I do wonder what this has to do with us being in Romania. The blonde boy questioned. That's one of the most amusing parts. Surprisingly, it wasn't Amelia who responded, but instead Volley, as a small excited smile appeared on his face, the same one he showed every time Naruto started to explore a new branch of the authority, a smile that Naruto wasn't particularly interested in having directed at him. When creating the peerage system, the leaders considered that some might not be completely loyal to their kings, so they placed a subtle magic inside that made one more inclined to believing in or obeying their king. In the process, there were repercussions for abandoning, betraying, or killing their king. Each is a different level of punishment. Normally a hybrid would be dealt a near crippling pain before losing their devil magic. If they betray the king, then the piece ends up mutating and turning them into a mindless, disgusting monster, though at times they can preserve their minds. Finally, those who kill their king suffer the worst punishment. Their magic becomes poison, and they keep the magic power of a devil and almost all of the benefits that come with it, except for one crucial part: they lose the protection against demonic man they naturally get when they inherit an evil piece. Even when they don't use magic, it still feels like someone pumping acid through their veins, and gets worse with the use of magic, driving most to kill themselves. Of course, there was also an unintended side effect of this, due to most hybrids being unable to deal with or properly meld with the corrosive aspects of devil magic. When a hybrid broke down or lost control, it would become a warped and hideous creature, much like the betrayers. Though a lot of devils conveniently forget to mention this point when they inform their new slaves of what their life will be like from that point on, the Longinus user described. I guess that's actually in line with what devils are supposed to be like, Naruto muttered. I had thought them to be soft due to my interactions with Azazel and other fallen. Haha, guess that was a mistake. There was no humor or joy in his chuckle, just bitter disappointment. Actually, similar to your rather basic understanding, the current more active devils are much kinder and less cruel and chaotic than the previous generation. While fragile, a few of the heirs to the remaining pillars are being raised in a semi-peaceful time with 4 Satans that wish for the peace to continue so long as it benefits their race. The warping of those that lose control was a side effect not even Beelzebub could foresee, Amelia calmly explained to Naruto. As for why we are here, since Volley chose to not explain that part, there are reports of a stray devil nearby, which is a betrayer, considering they are the only ones we need to hunt, has appeared nearby, and Lord Azazel has tasked you two with hunting and exterminating it. We believe it to be a vampire-devil hybrid with part of its intelligence still intact due to most devils living in Romania. Amelia finished while looking at the two with a seriousness that they only ever saw from Shemezai. Alright, I think I understand better, though I don't know all that much about vampires. Though I do wonder why betrayers are the only ones that are hunted, are the ones that kill their kings even worse, even with the curse? Naruto asked in a confused manner. Yes, they are, though they are almost immediately dealt with by the devils trained to hunt them, or they are placed on a kill-on-sight list. Of course, there are exceptions to this such as the Black Cat Kuroka and the Red Priest Senso, who was able to remove the curse through their own might or get someone strong enough to help them with it. Though those two and others like them are considered semi-ultimate class beings or SS rank threats, so nothing you or Volley can currently handle. Amelia explained. Next, I will explain vampires and what you need to watch out for when facing strays. Mansion in Romania. Naruto could smell the blood and rot emanating off the mansion which he and Volley now stood in front of. The mansion seemed to be covered in a curtain of gloom and misery, constantly emitting a faint crimson glow that seemed to suffuse the surrounding area. To Naruto, this reminded him of one of the old battlefields that he had passed while on a mission with his old team. The battlefield was said to have hosted one of the bloodiest battles in all three wars and thus still contained traces of blood and misery. It was a place that most people would instinctively avoid, yet the place that Naruto and Volley were supposed to head into. Naruto could feel his nose crumple in disgust. Considering the stench of blood and traces of demonic magic, I'm going to assume we are in the right place, Volley said in a tone so heavily laden with annoyance that Naruto was caught off guard for a moment. Volley then started walking with Naruto a step behind, trying to find a way to make sure his primordial chakra heightened senses weren't overwhelmed the moment they opened the door. You don't want to be doing this job, do you? Naruto asked, slightly turning his head to gaze at his closest friend. He knew that Volley seemed to dislike dealing with matters that usually did not result in a large battle with a strong opponent. Well, I don't mind it, I already know that this fight won't be any fun. The hybrid is no doubt weak without factoring in your authority and my divine dividing. I doubt there are any Rouge hybrids that we can't deal with quite easily. So no, I'm not too excited about this job. Volley explained as the two started to ascend the stairs that led to the front door of the mini-mansion. I guess I can see your point, though I choose to concern myself with the future victims, I guess you aren't too worried about them. Naruto asked, not taking a shot at his friend, but merely stating something he had come to see as a pattern in his friend's behavior. Volley did not respond, merely replying with a small snort as they finally arrived at the door which stood slightly ajar, letting a putrid and repulsive stench leak out into the air around it. It was a mixed stench of bodily excrement, rotting corpses, and copious amounts of blood. Naruto recoiled as soon as the stench hit him before bending over and vomiting on the house porch, unable to deal with it due to his enhanced nose. Volley, having been told by Azazel this might happen, took out a small bottle with a pure black liquid inside and moved it in front of Naruto's nose after he finished puking. He saw his friend recoil in disgust before his expression slightly changed and he took a few wary whiffs of the air around him before sighing in relief. While Volley did not know what the vial was, he did know that it was supposed to affect Naruto's smelling capabilities. After seeing Naruto recover and nod in a gratified manner, Volley turned back towards the door and pushed it fully open, keeping quiet throughout the whole process so as to try to not alert the hybrid inside. Even if Volley was confident in his and Naruto's might, he still saw no point in fighting a mutated hybrid with no caution. He was a battle maniac, not an idiot. They slowly kept walking till they came to the dining room, which had what was most likely dozens of corpses scattered about the floor and table. I was wondering how long it would take till some new prey appeared. I was getting quite hungry during the wait. A shrill chaotic voice filled with malice and insanity reverberated through the room, causing the walls, furniture, paintings, and mirrors to shake. It was a voice that caused people's heads to pulse. Swaying unsteadily, a hideous vampire-like being walked out of the shadows. Its body was caked in blood and its clothes barely succeeded in remaining to cover his private bits. Upon looking closer, you could see cracks and bumps covering his face and cheeks, which slowly oozed pus and other unidentifiable liquids. On top of that, if only to add to the thing's revolting appearance, the being's arms looked too long and the legs too short. You could almost see through the skin due to how pale it was. Disgusting, Volley growled out as he gazed at the hideous abomination before him, a perfect representation of one who lost control of their demonic magic and transformed into nothing but a half-insane monster that sought only to satisfy its own hunger. My oh my, how very rude you are, young man. The being replied in a happy voice before its mouth moved in an attempt to laugh yet made a disgusting strangled coughing noise. He stumbled forward slightly before his posture became abnormally rigid, followed by the sound of bones popping incorrectly and some even breaking. Oh well, I would offer to teach you some manner, but I think it would be better that being paused before all three occupants of the room tensed ready to fight if I just ate you. But those words, the hideous being shot forward at a surprising speed as his vampiric wings ripped out of his back and lifted him off the ground to boost his speed, intent on devouring the two pieces of prey that stumbled into his lair. Having already tensed in anticipation of an attack from the monster before them, both Volley and Naruto quickly shot to the side while making sure to keep the monster in their sights. The hybrid quickly flapped his wings, pulling himself to an abrupt stop before rounding on the one who referred to him as disgusting, channeling some mana into his palm. The blood that lay quietly on the floor shot towards his hand before forming an elegant short sword. The damper's muscles suddenly bulged dangerously before he viciously hurled the blade towards Volley in an attempt to skewer him. Naruto, having already experienced many fast-paced battles, did not hesitate to choose the best route to continue down to end the battle as fast as possible. Quickly raising his hand, he felt the magic course through him and the migraine-inducing tattoo on his right expand and creep to just above his elbow. Suddenly he seemed to speak, yet no words came out for a second before all of a sudden every one of the occupants heard the words that seemed to drill through reality and warp the natural rules. The use of wings to fly is forbidden here. The words seemed to lag behind his lips and throat, yet contained an immense pressure that seemed to demand subservience. The vampire, who was originally turning to face the one that had just spoken those odd-sounding and psyche pain-inducing words, suddenly felt an enormous pressure fall upon his back that seemed to want to force him to the ground. He resisted for a second before he was unable to handle the pressure any longer and plummeted towards the ground as his wings disappeared. "The fuck was that, you mannerless child?" the hybrid shouted in shock and rage as he was forced back to the ground. At this point, Volley had already used his wings to dodge the blood blade before releasing them so as to not suffer under the law that Naruto had created. "Yes," Naruto stated with an amused and playful smile as the massive amount of magic and knowledge slightly warped his thought process. "Haha, I'm just kidding, you're gonna be dead before you could even make a guess." While Naruto detested killing under normal circumstances, these sadly were not normal circumstances. Not only was his thought process changed by the authority, but the being before him also committed many unspeakable crimes and could no longer be considered worthy of a second chance. "Ah!" Divide, scoffing in amusement, Volley summoned his sacred gear when the hybrid turned its back to him. Quickly raising his arm, he focused on the hybrid before dividing his power in half with a simple command. Quickly after that, he scribbled out runes before letting pure white lightning descend upon the hybrid from the magic seal that now stood before him. The hybrid, in a showcase of his experience, was not a moment too slow as he quickly controlled the blood around him to form a barrier that blocked the lightning coming from Volley, focusing on strengthening the point of contact and making the lightning follow a certain path to minimize the blood that would get destroyed, though it did not have the effect he wanted as it was weaker than it should have been. "DCH, damn it Naruto, can't you outlaw the use of manipulating blood?" Volley half shouted in an annoyed manner at his companion. While he was not struggling in this fight, he knew that the unnatural amount of blood around them was not simply there because the damper was too lazy to clean. He just didn't expect the damper to be able to manipulate it to such a degree. Though this was probably not the best idea, Volley realized as he saw the damper's eyes widen before he pivoted on his heel and dashed at Naruto, now perceiving him as the biggest threat. While he could still use magic, he was only a mid-class hybrid before he betrayed his king, so if he lost his blood magic, it would cause him to be put in an even worse situation than he currently was in. "Oh, thanks Val," Naruto snapped in annoyance as the devil vampire hybrid rounded on him dangerously. "Please tell everyone what I can do. In fact, could you say it once more, a little louder? I think there might be someone in fucking Antarctica who might have not heard you too clearly," Naruto yelled while dodging the reckless and haphazard blood attack the pitiful damper hybrid was directing at him. "Big mistake," Naruto whispered as the hybrid finally got close enough to Naruto for him to engage in close combat. "Divide" was all that Naruto heard as he saw the hybrid before him falter in his steps. Having just landed after jumping back slightly, Naruto stopped controlling his center of gravity, causing him to lose his balance and start to fall to the side. Though he quickly amended this by firmly planting his left foot on the ground before shooting forwards right into the opening produced by Volley's previous divide. His arm shot forward as he wrapped it around the damper's neck and grabbed his collar before he vaulted over him. Stabilizing his posture in mid-air, Naruto tightened his grip before his feet touched the ground and the hybrid was flung over his shoulder and into the air. Obviously disoriented by the sudden divide and the set of movements which was completed in but a second, the damper was unable to do anything as Naruto distorted the distance between the two and appeared above him before lashing out at his left ear with a ruthless kick. Once again distorting the distance, Naruto spun to finish the motion of his kick before landing beside Volley. "Haha, guess I will go ahead and finish this," Volley said as he raised his hand to bring forth a spell that would be able to kill the now immobilized damper. However, he stopped as he saw his friend amble toward the downed monster with distant eyes, as if not fully there at the moment. "Saint, stay away, you monster." The downed beast squealed while unable to move due to where Naruto kicked him. Naruto meanwhile didn't respond or even show any sign of recognition as he slowly crouched down and gently laid his hand in front of the face of the hybrid before him. "Devour" was his simple command before the tattoo which had topped at his elbow expanded down to his hand and extended onto each of his fingers. Upon which the tattoo glowed an eerie crimson before the vampire howled in pain as the tattoo forcefully took the magic knowledge and blood manipulation ability that the vampire possessed. After doing so, Naruto stood up before he felt the energy leave his body and he started to fall, though he stopped as Vali and Emilia, who had been observing the fight, appeared by his side and held him up. "Well, never saw that before," was all Vali could say as he was pinned by Emilia's demanding stare. Praying to Grigori 2 days later, Nachuo sat up with a groan as he raised his hand to clutch his throbbing temples, which seemed to pulse in wrathful anger at Naruto's devouring of knowledge at the end of his fight with the damper hybrid. Slowly getting his bearings, Naruto noticed that he was shirtless before he noticed something on the edge of his vision. Slowly turning his head so as to not aggravate his headache, he noticed that the tattoo which normally lay dormant in the form of a complex circle on his shoulder now seemed to have shifted to a circle with protrusions coming off of it, with a circle fractured by the protrusions enveloping it. Instinctively he seemed to notice that the two tattoos formed an odd eye-like formation before a flood of knowledge even larger than the vampire's ran through his head, causing him to lose consciousness as a single thought passed through his mind. The sage Azazel's manner a day later. "So what you are saying is that Naruto woke up, clutched his head, turned to look at his shoulder, and then passed out at his nose, bled before you discovered that his brain was too stressed and strained by whatever knowledge you are guessing he gained and shut down in one of the worst ways possible." The leader of the fallen angels, Azazel, growled out in annoyance at the situation Emilia had just described to him. "Yes, my lord, that is my best guess." The fallen of Serenity replied in an even tone as she stood before her leader, who sat beside the blonde boy's side as Lavinia once again displayed her older sister's side and carefully fretted over him. The blonde meanwhile lay quietly as his brows twitched every so often. It seemed like he was awake, just not in a conscious form, which was vexing to the inhabitants of the room, well, with the exception of Azazel, who seemed to not bother himself with it too much. "Oh well, I guess there is nothing that we can do but use some magic to help his mind heal and wait for him to wake back up again." Azazel sighed before thinking to himself. "And hopefully stay awake this time." Unknown library. Naruto lay curled in a ball on the floor of the mysterious library that seemed to be enveloped in a bronzish-colored fog. Around the bookshelves within the shadows seemed to contain an infinite depth and darkness, and from their gaze would seem to sweep over Naruto every so often. It carried with it the feeling of having one's secret laid bare before the sight of the eyes, be it the past, present or future, strength or weakness, nothing could escape its sight. As Naruto lay there gently shivering, knowledge about this place, what it represented, and what it could do was being slowly injected into Naruto's mind. Due to the painful process of using it unknowingly against the vampire, Naruto's brain was already taxed, so it took the space almost a full day for Naruto to incorporate all of the knowledge before he struggled to his feet and stumbled to one of the couches that seemed to be in the middle of the seemingly endless library. It was a velvet red 3-seater couch with two similar armchairs sitting diagonally on either side with an ornate wooden coffee table placed in the center. Plopping down roughly on the couch, he slowly opened his eyes to gaze at the area around him to see if he could find anything. After looking at all the bookshelves that he could see from his position on the couch, he eventually sighed as he saw only one book which had a dark red cover that gave off the feeling of blood seeping down. Licking his tongue in annoyance, he looked down only for his gaze to halt as two books that had not been there earlier were now lying on the coffee table ahead of him, just close enough for Naruto to reach out and grab it. Originally he was planning to ignore the book as every instinct that his teachers, be it Kakashi, Jiraiya or Azazel, had drilled into him told him that it was stupid to grab a book of unknown origins in a place he was not familiar with, plus he doubted that his brain could actually tolerate reading and comprehending the book right now. Yet before he knew what he was doing, his hand had already grabbed hold of the book and started to bring it closer to him. Naruto quickly shot up, ignoring his headache as much as he could for the time being, and prepared to drop the book, all the while being on high alert for an attack from some unknown assailant. Yet nothing happened. He was unable to drop the book, nor was he attacked without any warning. Waiting for almost 10 minutes, Naruto finally deemed that there was no one else nearby and that he would be fine. Gazing at the book, Naruto finally surrendered to his curiosity as he looked at the cover and then began to open it. The cover was a pale blue, almost cyan color, and had an image of a white tower that seemed to directly sprout out from a small book, seemingly giving rise to a tower of knowledge and wisdom. He noticed as he quickly flipped through it that some parts of the book were blank, like someone had purposely erased them, or the author simply didn't know enough to write in it. From what he could tell from the brief skimming of the book, it seemed to describe what this place represented, as well as giving insight as to what it was used for. Supposedly this second branch of magic was derived from a gift the biblical god had once bestowed unto Merlin upon the completion of a job that was requested by the father of angels himself, though he was only gifted half as the other half already lay in the hands of another. After finishing skimming the book he realized that this library had the ability to record and replicate the attacks or magic that he had witnessed, with the replication strength depending on his understanding. Using it also allowed his brain to operate faster and run multiple thoughts at the same time, as well as helping with the creation of new magic or abilities and the learning of old ones. Naruto realized why Merlin was regarded as the god of magic. It would have been great if the law came with an instruction manual. Naruto sighed as he finished figuring out what the book and the space around him was. He slowly set the book down and massaged his temples before he froze as he realized that his headache had disappeared without him noticing. Sighing in relief he set the cyan-colored book down before reaching out to grab the second one. Quickly he noticed this one was much different as it had no cover design, the pages looked old and worn down, and it did not give off the same feeling that the sage did. Instead, it seemed to weigh far more than it should have, as if weighed down by the emotions of the person that had written it. The book was covered in light brown leather with no words or markings anywhere on it. It was the type of book you would see once and then forget about a few seconds later. Picking it up he first probed the space and realized he wouldn't be able to leave for a while, similar to what happened when he injured himself too badly and couldn't leave his mindscape. Opening the book to a random page, Naruto was surprised to realize that the book was written like a diary or personal journal. Originally he was planning on skimming through it like the other book, but the first sentence that he read caused him to pause before seriously reading it. What is a creator class being? I recently came into contact with the Dragon Goddess of Infinity office, though I later learned that she has no defined gender. I prefer to refer to her as such as she sticks solely to female as far as I have seen, and the Dragon God of Dreams Great Red, who are regarded as two of the strongest beings in all of creation. While Lady Office appeared quite annoyed by my presence in the dimensional gap, she did not force me out as Great Red appeared shortly after, and she chose to leave rather than deal with him from what I could guess of her personality from Great Red. They seemed interesting to say the least. Great Red is somewhat like a delinquent flying through the gap just messing around, while Lady Office is a near emotionless being who only desires to force all other beings out of the gap. Anyway, I'm getting off track. What I want to talk about are the creator class beings. There are a lot of classes that separate power levels. For instance, the angels and their number of wings, then the ultimate class, then God class, though they can be divided even further if you so desire. What I want to know about are beings like the biblical god, Office, Great Red, the spirit of Yggdrasil, Chaos, Brahma, and Atum. They are all referred to as creators or the centerpiece in Yggdrasil's mythos, of their mythologies if they have one, yet where did they come from? Why can so many creators exist all at once? Why are they all disappearing and who are the beings on the other side of the abyss? Naruto was more shocked than he had ever been, not only due to learning of the dragon gods, but also the existence of the different creator class beings, such as the spirit of Yggdrasil, Chaos, and Brahma, considering he knew of those mythologies from Azazel. He was just never informed of their being true creators, aside from the biblical god. But the sentence that gave him pause the most was without a doubt the last one. Naruto had a good idea who this journal belonged to, and thus knew that these questions were far more important than they first seemed. Unable to figure anything out, Naruto decided to continue reading and see what he could find. Scanning a few entries, he failed to find anything useful or anything related to the previous entry until he stumbled onto one related to the angels. I met the favorite daughter of heaven today. I must say of all the rumors I had heard about her, none seemed to fit. She was of course beautiful beyond compare, with no one I had ever met coming anywhere near her, but her personality was quite different than I had imagined it would be. She was kind and humble like most angels, but she was also serious from time to time and burdened. It was as if some invisible weight had settled itself on her shoulders and weighed them down, though that didn't stop her from smiling with such kindness and warmth that it had me doubling back. She also seemed to show a brief bit of immaturity and a childish side from time to time which seemed quite endearing. From what I know, Gabriel appears to hail from the omniscience part of God's 5 main branches of magic. The White Tower, it is remarkably similar to my own sage, but leans more towards omnipotence, as well as prophecies and imitation of magic she had seen. Of course, she only shared this with me due to the past help I offered to her creator. I also learned what other branches God held and which each of his creations inherited. Michiel inherited the visionary, which dealt with much more than just creation, though that's a whole different topic. Uriel inherited the fate or wheel of fortune, something I didn't imagine God would wield, though I didn't interrupt her and mention this. Raphael inherited the twilight, which surprisingly fits with his mellow calm personality. Azazel, who is now fallen. Hold the wrath or the calamity as others call it. It is where most of God's omnipotence stems from alongside the Son, which Gabriel wields partial authority over alongside Michael. And finally Lucifer or the primordial devil wields the hanged man. I came to learn that God gave Gabriel half of the Son because he feared that she would have little ways to defend herself without it. It was a surprise to find that the nigh all-powerful being acted like an overprotective worried father from time to time. That was the final time Merlin had mentioned anything related to the first passage Naruto truly read, almost as if he was afraid or had completely forgotten about it. So Naruto laid the book back on the table, leaned back, and rubbed his temples in annoyance at barely having his curiosity sated. Sighing, he once again brushed his consciousness against the outside and received the same restricting response as earlier. So with a sigh, he laid down and prepared to sleep until he woke up naturally. Konoha Year 80. Jiraiya was livid. He should have been outside searching for his student, successor, and godson, but no, the stupid elders had called him back to the village. For what reason he had a faint inkling about, though if his math and prediction were right they still had 2 to 3 years. Even then they had no way to deal with the impending problem due to the lack of Uzumkais and proper sealing masters aside from himself, and even then he could not perform at the level of his late student in Kushina. Landing gently outside the window of the Hokage's personal office, Jiraiya took a minute to compose his expression before he threw the window open and entered in what he knew was an obnoxious and overly grand entrance. Letting smoke bomb tags he had attached to the bottom of his sandals erupt, Jiraiya let the smoke clear to reveal him standing atop a toad with 2 smaller ones, flanking the one he was on, and shouted out one of his 2 signature phrases. Haha, behold the most holy hermit sage of the Mount Myaboku toad, the greatest toad sage, the gallant Jiraiya. The insane man barged in as he shouted, only to have an abnormally hard teacup hurled at his nose. Damn it Haim, I thought you said you would stop doing that. Jiraiya pitifully whined after the teacup shattered against his nose, nearly breaking it in the process. I said I would stop doing it if you stopped acting like an idiot, Jiraiya. Tsunade snapped as Jiraiya turned to look at her with a childish pout. At this point, Jiraiya would normally be checking Tsunade out in his normal perverted way, yet instead, like he had started doing every time he had visited in the last 2 years, he carefully inspected Tsunade to see if there were any signs of her slipping back into the rabbit hole he and Naruto struggled so much to bring her out of. I'm fine, Jiraiya, you need not check on me every time you drop in for a visit. While it is painful, I still believe he will find a way back and will not collapse until he comes back to take the mantle of Hokage for himself like he always said he would. And like she said, Tsunade looked almost the same as she had 2 years ago when they first learned of Naruto's disappearance, add a wrinkle or 2 developed from stress. I'm just worried for you, Haim, we have all been taking it rough, especially Naruto's friends, teachers, and everyone else who was close to him. Hell, just take a look at those rookies, especially the Hyuga girl and Kakashi, and you will be able to see what I mean. At this point, Kakashi might reach a flea on side order within the next year or 2 if he keeps training the way he has been so far. And the Hyuga heiress, wee, I have never seen someone so soft threw themselves into such a rigorous and straining training regimen. At this point, she might be Jonin or High Chunin in the next year and a half. Jiraiya stated in awe and slight worry, and Tsunade couldn't refute him at all as he was completely right. Kakashi had quickly rejoined Anbu after Tsunade told him to. He took Shikamaru and 2 existing Anbu members and created one of the deadliest 4-man cells Anbu had seen in a long time. Meanwhile, Hinata Hyuga had thrown herself into a self-destructive training regime so bad that Hiashi himself had to step in to make sure she didn't personally damage herself. She quickly grew with a new desire for strength and reached a level that few her age could match, having taken a few lessons under Tsunade alongside Ino, who mostly trained in her clan, and Sakura, who was now her official apprentice. She was advancing at an astonishing and had wiped away any doubts about her being the heiress half a year ago when some elders who weren't as aware of her training began to doubt her. While she trained rigorously inside her and her father's personal training ground, she had become even quieter and more reclusive than before, thus few people outside of the rookies and her direct family knew how much she had grown. Though she had begun properly learning how to handle clan matters and was interacting with both sides more often these days, and even sitting in on less important council meetings, upon receiving Tsunade's approval of course. Of course, the other rookies alongside Might Guy had grown a considerable amount as well, it just didn't quite match the growth displayed by Kakashi and Hinata. Anyways, I'm guessing you have a good idea as to why you were called here. Tsunade sighed as she turned back to the few pieces of paper scattered across her desk. Jiraiya took one of the chairs on the other side, knowing that they would soon have to head to the meeting room to deal with whatever problem had recently popped up. Yeah, though I don't know what the big deal is, the Kyuubi would require at the minimum 4 to 5 years to reform, and so far it's only been at a maximum of 2, so we currently have nothing to fear, Jiraiya stated in a tone that showed he did not doubt his knowledge, and he wasn't wrong. From recorded sightings from the Waring clan era, they had been able to confirm how long it would take the Kyuubi to reform after dying. It was also the reason that Konoha had been more focused on boosting its alliances with Suna and Kiri, whom they allied themselves with after Mei took control, and putting less attention on finding surviving Uzumakas, with only Jiraiya and a select few Anbu teams being given the task. Yes, that was the original belief, though it appears we were wrong. Some complications have appeared that threw the timetable into disarray. Tsunade sighed as she rubbed her temples in exasperation. But that is not the reason you are back, some complications and other matters require our immediate attention, Tsunade said in a voice that made Jiraiya subconsciously straighten up. Have you made contact with Itachi recently? I know that the Uchiha massacre has quite a few secrets revolving around it, though I don't know all of them. I do know that Hiruzen made a deal with Itachi upon his abandoning of the village, which is partially why we have been able to avoid the Akatsuki so well. The Slug Princess asked. Jiraiya sighed before taking a second to collect his thoughts. To be completely honest, I don't even know the full truth behind the massacre. The only thing I know is, despite Itachi's might and his terrifying power despite his age, he could not have taken on the entire clan by himself, even in a surprise attack. As for contact, yes, we ended up meeting and talking for a few minutes. I explained the situation to Itachi and what had happened, and despite his reluctance to believe that Sasuke would do that, he eventually caved before saying he understood the reason we declared Sasuke an enemy of Konoha on par with Orochimaru. He will continue to help us by providing information, and he will even see if he can spot any signs of the Kyuubi or Naruto while he is at it. Jiraiya finished his explanation to Tsunade before he focused on her eyes to see if he could gather anything from her currently indifferent expression. I see, well, at least we still have the information branch. Now on to the final matter before the meeting. We have found one of Orochimaru's bases recently and plan to assemble a team to go and siege it. It's an island slightly off the main continent, and Orochimaru supposedly places great importance on whatever is over there, so we are assembling a team to take it. The team will be made of 5 to 6 members with Kakashi and his team heading it. I want you to go and scout the area. After doing so, you will meet up with Team Kakashi and relay the information, upon which you will join them in the siege of the base. Tsunade said as she straightened her posture and looked at Jiraiya with the utmost seriousness. I see, that's good to know. I will head out and start scouting as soon as the meeting ends, or I get too impatient. Jiraiya started with a small smile before it turned to a vindictive and excited smile the more he thought about it. Just thinking back to what Kakashi told him the snake bastard had said about his student, he couldn't help but have in blood boil in rage and indignation. Tsunade nodded her head, knowing just how mad her old teammate had been when he learned of Naruto's disappearance and everything else. She stood up before getting Jiraiya to follow her as they headed towards the council room, in which they would be broaching a problem that worried even Tsunade. Quickly arriving at the council chambers, the doors were opened by the 2 Anbu standing at the door. Walking inside, Tsunade took a seat at the head of the table, with Jiraiya standing to her left and slightly behind. Alright, now that everyone is here we can begin the meeting. Surprising most of the council members, it was not Tsunade who officially started the meeting, but instead, Hiashi was the one who started it, which caused many people to look at him strangely, as Tsunade had stopped dealing with quite a bit of shit she originally put up with, like No and other obscure projects. Thus few people would be bold enough to get on her bad side these days. Of course, most of them knew it was because she wanted the village to be as nice as possible for when Naruto returned, so he would have an easier time becoming Hokage without having to deal with his predecessor's messes. Recently, while on missions to other lands, a few of my kin have started to notice a large amount of unnatural chakra flowing at accelerated rates towards the Valley of the End. Originally we were just slightly concerned with this and reported it to Hokage-sama. Hiashi turned to glance at Tsunade and saw her direct and approving nod at him. Upon orders from Hokage-sama, I sent more of my older and experienced members to observe and see if they could figure anything out, and they came back with extremely concerning results. The chakra was that of the Bijus, and most likely the Kyuubis if we had to guess, and from the rate it was gathering I would say. He paused at this point and surveyed the room. The elders still looked confused and only slightly worried, having not been informed of this earlier. Shikaku looked like he had just seen a ghost, and most of the others were looking at each other, trying to figure out the importance, with few seeming to have grasped a reason or at least having come close, those being Shibi, Shikaku, Jiraiya, and Kakashi, who was sitting in the Hada clan head seat. From our best guesses, we only have maybe a year before the Kyuubi can fully reform, and maybe 2 before it is at its full might, just as it was 15 years ago. And with that sentence, all the blood from everyone's faces drained, making them look like ghosts, as their eyes widened and raw primal fear showed in their eyes. Azazel's manner 2 days later. It had been a day since Naruto had fully awoken and stayed awake, and he was currently sitting in one of the many activity rooms located in his guardian's obnoxiously big, in his opinion, house as he distractedly flipped through the notes that were left in the seal by his father regarding the Hiration. But the Sage's help, Naruto had been making good headway regarding getting basic use of the technique. Where he originally thought it would take 3 to 4 years to get a basic grasp of the technique to now having it in maybe half a year or 1 year. Another odd tidbit that Naruto had noticed was that he could now consciously control his ability to see the flowing rivers of golden magic and green nature chakra through the air around him, and of course, there were still those mysterious rivers of silvery black motes that neither he nor Azazel could figure out. Around the time Azazel started noticing a disturbance in the world, Naruto noticed the previously silver motes turn slightly black before it stopped some days later. Currently, he was waiting for Azazel to return, as the fallen angel had, in passing, mentioned he had a journal page or two from Merlin's later meeting with Gabriel and his second trip into the dimensional gap. Naruto was definitely interested in Merlin's trip into the dimension gap. Naruto was far more interested in his talks with the Daughter of Heaven. Previously Merlin had mentioned that Gabriel seemed burdened by something, and Naruto wanted to know what it was. Gabriel and God's White Tower seemed surprisingly similar to his sage, only built more towards knowledge of all things, rather than purely magic and the arcane arts. Of course, Naruto was also interested in learning more about the dragon goddess of infinity, but considering it would be rare for Naruto to interact with her if he ever did, his interest was slightly curbed compared to Gabriel, who was somewhat like a sister to Azazel. Azazel walked out while speaking in a sing-song-like voice as he carried a bundle of worn brownish-yellow papers in his hands. It was buried under quite a lot of things, but I eventually found it. Though I am unable to read it because of the language that Merlin wrote it in, I am sure that our theory of the language lying within the sage is correct, so you should have no problems when it comes to reading it. He said in a casual tone despite the slight pout when he spoke of not being able to read it. Yes, I hope it does work. Anyways, you said around this time was when Merlin had met Gabriel a few times and after his second trip to the gap to interact with the dragon gods, right? Naruto questioned to get a better preliminary understanding. Yes, Azazel nodded as he set the papers down and took a seat for himself. After Merlin's visit to my sister, he seemed a little down and pitiful, so with that man's empathy, I thought my sister told him something and he felt bad for her. I wished to know what it was. Of course, I don't expect you to tell me if you think it's best for Gabriel to keep her secret. Azazel explained as he looked out into the garden they were situated in the middle of. Well, he was now fallen. Naruto knew that Azazel cared greatly for most of the older angels, hence his rather strong advocacy of peace amongst the biblical faction, though supposedly there was a small feud rivalry between him and Michiel, due to actions from when he was still an angel. As for his second trip into the gap, that was a bit more concerning considering how pale he looked. He had actually come straight to the Grigori after that, looking pale as a ghost. I don't really want to know what he saw, yet at the same time, I really do want to know. The fallen sighed in exasperation at his conflicting emotions. Chuckling in amusement at his pseudo-guardian's words and inner conflict, Naruto promised that if he came to a decision by the end, Naruto would either let him know or not. Before he organized the papers and prepared to read about the angel who had caught his interest recently, from both Merlin's journal and Azazel's small stories of her. I met Gabriel once again today. We had a nice talk while she tended to her own personal garden within the Garden of Eden. We were comparing Gabriel's White Tower and my sage, and she was pointing out the major difference to me. For instance, while I can understand and pick apart a spell or technique after seeing it once, I can't perform it immediately. I still have a trial and error phase, as sage focuses more on countering immediately and learning later. Whereas Gabriel's and God's White Tower focuses on replicating and imitating magic, they can still learn later, but it will be harder than learning with the sage. It in the end led to us talking about how corruptive absolute power and or knowledge can be. Of course I know this all too well. Well, Gabriel mostly stays in heaven. I have been traveling the world for decades upon decades, and I have seen great kings fall to their power and become corrupt. Even Arthur, my dear king, despite his humility and kindness, almost fell to his own power. But he was able to extricate and ground himself and died as a human just as he wished. Naruto could feel Merlin's sadness emanating off the paper as he talked about his king's death. After we finished talking about that, we talked about how our abilities allowed us to see the world in unique ways. This is where everything started to go downhill for me. The sage allows me to see pure magic and allows me to inherit its blessing, preventing me from aging once I hit a certain point. I can also faintly see pure silver and green rivers of light floating, though I don't know what those are. Gabriel's, well, it's vastly different. The White Tower, like I've said previously, excels in omnipotence, thus it focuses more on the knowledge and understanding of the things around oneself than a deeper understanding of mana and mana alone. From what Gabriel told me, she could sense emotions and base thoughts of those around her, for instance when they lie or when they tell the truth. Doesn't sound so bad at first, right? That's what I thought as well until she mentioned she could sense their lust and greed of all beings. I doubt God thought of what she would experience being someone who almost all pantheons unanimously agree is regarded as the most beautiful being to exist amongst all supernatural factions. Still, I can't help but grieve for the poor soul who constantly has to feel those desires being directed at her due to her beauty and personality. It makes me glad the sage does not allow me to know of the emotions of those around. I don't think I would have been able to put up with the darkness as well as Gabriel has. I wish I could just give her a hug to help her." Naruto was unresponsive. He just kept rereading the last few lines with pity and understanding. While he was not the target of lust or greed that often, he could still sense the emotion being directed at others, made worse by being surrounded by fallen who chose to give in to most of their desires. Of course, Naruto had learned there were different types of lust over the years. Most that he sensed was similar to sticky, grimy sludge that represented pure unchecked lust. It was repulsive to Naturo and made him sick. The next was the one he sensed from Azazel the most, once when Azazel had gotten him drunk, which made Naruto figure out that the Kyuubi was purposely keeping him from getting drunk just to piss him off. He asked why Azazel's lust seemed so different from other, as Naruto knew it contained no love for the owner of the body just like others. Azazel simply responded with one word: respect. That was his explanation. While he didn't love his partners the way spouses love each other, he did respect them, thus the emotion was more tolerable on the senses. The next and last Naruto knew of dealt with the lust a husband has for his wife and vice versa, and was actually not too repulsive and surprisingly tolerable. Of course, Naruto could suppress the emotions by focusing his sensory ability solely on the hatred and anger contained within nature, as he was used to ignoring big balls of anger and pushing the other emotions down to practically unnoticeable levels. But he guessed Gabriel couldn't do that. Sighing, Naruto set the papers down and picked up the ones from Merlin's second trip into the gap, deciding to come back to Gabriel's problem later to see if he could help her in any way. And decided to read of when Merlin visited the gap after having been named the father of magic. These papers seemed to contain a myriad of emotion and turmoil in them, despite it having been so long since they were written. I went to the gap once again and appeared right in front of office. She seemed annoyed yet too tired to bother doing anything. After tentatively asking if anything happened and being pinned by her piercing stare, she eventually decided to tell me that Great Red had just left after she had failed to force him out of the gap. I asked her if she wanted me to leave, but she said she didn't care either way because she knew I would eventually leave. After a bit of talking and asking, I eventually got the nerve to ask her the question I had come to ask about the creators. I got an answer I honestly wasn't expecting. For Norse and Greek Roman, there was no true creator, as both Yggdrasil and Chaos had used some other external source to create the primordial. As for Shinto, apparently, part of it has been erased, and Izanami and Isangai were not the first two. Then we got into the deeper stuff. Office refused to talk to me about the abyss and the creatures on the other side, saying I was too weak to know about them. As for God, Atum, Brahim, Zmukane, Office said most of the myths are fake. There is only one being designated the creator. They are not disappearing, they simply never existed in the first place. Then where did all the pantheons come from? Who said they were creators? Who is lying to everyone? Why are they lying and deceiving everyone? What are they hiding? Forest near Rome, midnight 1 year later, year 2016. Ducking down and sliding across the floor, Naruto narrowly dodged the odd obsidian-colored spear that flew over his head, feeling it slice some of his hair in the process. Damn it took forever for me to fix this shit. Stop messing it up, Naruto yelled at the Rouge exorcist that he had been tasked with exterminating. Then leave me alone, you stupid fuck, the bland-looking exorcist yelled back while panting. While Naruto was relatively uninjured, having only minor scratches and one bad gash along his back, though he had forced his regenerative ability to speed up to halt the bleeding, the exorcist he was fighting was not so lucky. He had small cuts covering his body, as well as a massive gash running along his left shoulder, completely disabling that arm. Most of his shirt was torn with small lacerations covering his body, some from wind and some from a blade that Naruto was wielding. Sorry, but the crimes you committed can't be forgiven. Naruto was cut off as he had to duck to avoid an exorcist who appeared behind him and lashed out with a heavy downward punch. Surprisingly, despite the exorcist's athletic composition, the ground shattered as the exiled exorcist's fist made contact with a rather hard forest floor beneath Naruto. Out of the corner of his eye, Naruto noticed the other one dash off into the forest, most likely to catch his breath. Sighing in annoyance, Naruto flicked his wrist gently before the air around him shifted. Turning back to the new exorcist, he took notes of his features and quickly took him to one of the dossier targets. This exorcist was surprisingly refined with a sharp face and indifferent expression. Most people would even find him pleasing to look at, if not for the horrible burn scar that covered the right side of his face. On his arm was a blackish-blue gauntlet that spiked towards the user, like dragon scales, with the fingers left uncovered. Naruto was familiar with the sacred gear from the dossiers Azazel had given him on the small group of exorcists. A sacred gear that specializes in boosting the user's strength, temporarily called twice critical, though from what Naruto gathered the glorified crow prefers to call it the watered-down boosted gear. To Naruto, neither the sacred gear nor the exorcist's use was particularly concerning. The one whom Naruto was more worried about was the bland, forgettable exorcist running around unchecked in the forest around them. The other exorcist, Ian he believed his name was, had a rather annoying sacred gear that allowed him to create spears out of anything he had once come into contact with, as long as he understood how it was made or what made it up. In a rather annoying coincidence, the man had once stumbled across low-level angelic steel and could make a handful of spears made up of them, though each one visibly drained him. So far he stuck to obsidian spears that he popped out like there was no tomorrow. Added on top of that was the fact the exorcist could control them as he wanted as long as he could see them, meaning Naruto always had to be on guard for a spear to randomly start flying towards his back. While Naruto could sense negative emotions due to the primordial chakra, he could not sense positive emotions though. He could feel the hostility or murderous intent coming from the exorcist, turning him into a beacon of hostility, but he could not locate the spear unless he sensed the magic, which he struggled to do as he never bothered learning it, as the sage came equipped with a version of it. Quickly realizing he was letting his thoughts wander, Naruto quickly focused back on his opponent, only to see him appearing right in front of him with his gauntlet-covered arm cocked back, preparing to throw his arm forward in an attempt to slug Naruto. Stumbling, Naruto lost his balance and fell backward, allowing the exorcist to adjust his stance and prepare to strike at him, though before he could Naruto flipped his palm up as a small pale gold magic circle appeared within it. Though despite noticing it, the exorcist did not stop as he drove his fist into Naruto's face and then the ground behind him, only for Naruto to burst into a cloud of smoke before the magic seal, which had been pulling in chakra and mana from the clone, mana and natural chakra, formed the air, and slight bits of primordial chakra mixed in form Naruto. Destabilized from all the contradictive energies boiling inside of it, while Naruto could somewhat make them work together, he had not done that and instead just haphazardly shoved them in with no regard for the consequences. Realizing what was happening, the exorcist prepared to escape as he pivoted on his foot and tensed his muscle, only for his sight to be drowned in an all-encompassing white light to which there seemed to be no end. A few miles away, pausing, the two clashing figures looked to their right and left respectively to gaze at the dome of energy that had grown to the point where it looked like a miniature sun on Earth. At this point the two were on a small hillside. They could see the damage the dome had wrought. The bland-looking exorcist stared with a look of shock and terror as he gazed at the dome, which seemed to devour everything in its path. Meanwhile, his opponent brushed a few strands of golden hair out of his silvery blue eyes as he sighed in annoyance. I know I created him with the orders of do as you see fit, but he could have at least left the forest alone. How am I going to explain this to Azazel? Naruto sighed before whispering to himself as he felt the memories of his clone flood into his head. Well, that 4 down, 2 to go at least, Naruto muttered before he brought his hand up to run his fingers through his hair in an attempt to move his bangs out of his eyes. Still, how did it develop into this? It was supposed to be a simple subdue mission, not a fucking manhunt. Aurelio 3 hours prior, Naruto was making his way through the small city that lay on the border of Vatican City. Why the stupid crow had sent him on a mission so close to the Vatican, where the Angel's main cathedral was located, he had no idea. Not that he minded being in Italy, as it was the country that produced one of his favorite food palettes. He was getting distracted again. Pausing, he swept his eyes across the crowd before he caught sight of the man he had been tailing for the past hour and a half. Noticing he was getting farther away than Naruto wanted him to be, Naruto quickly sped up, skillfully weaving through the crowd, relying on his emotional sensory ability to differentiate the people he could not see and plan his path while also keeping track of the exorcist. Sidestepping around a rather large group of friends who appeared to be enjoying their day off, Naruto was about to take a small detour to shave off some time, only to suddenly run into someone who wasn't there a few seconds ago. Stumbling back, Naruto quickly found his balance and stopped himself from falling to the ground as he rubbed his nose, which had collided with the girl's glabella, though the girl he had collided with was not so lucky as she was now on the ground, holding her hands to her glabella as her expression slightly warped. Looking up, Naruto bit his lip, knowing that if he delayed he would likely lose sight of the person he was tracking, though looking down at the golden-haired girl he couldn't help but crouch down to check on her. Screw it, I'll find him later. With the malice he's radiating, it shouldn't be too hard. With those thoughts, Naruto offered the girl his hand as he spoke up. I'm so sorry I didn't notice you in my rush, Naruto said as he crouched down and offered his hand to the girl who had stopped rubbing in between her eyes at this point. He watched as she moved her hands away from her eyes. She looked at his hand, seemingly distracted by something, for a few seconds before moving her own to grasp it and let herself be hoisted up gently by Naruto. After helping the girl up, Naruto was able to step back, despite the girl not letting go of his hand, as she continued to look at it and take a good look at her, while she did the same towards him. She was young, maybe 18 or 19 years old, and had some of the most beautiful golden hair he had ever seen, It was not like his dark gold, but instead, pure untainted gold that seemed to pronounce her vibrant green eyes, that held warmth and playfulness, that Naruto found himself getting slightly lost in, with two small yet beautiful lips that curled up ever so slightly as she felt the warmth of his hand before he gently shook his head and looked at her clothes to check for any scuff marks. He also faintly noticed that her eyes had lingered on his whisker-like marks on his cheeks for a few seconds longer, and her eyes seemed to actually light up in fascination and childish excitement. She was slightly tall with a slender body, standing at what was most likely 5'3" or 5'4" with a rather voluptuous figure. His eyes paused for a few heartbeats before moving on. While he would admit that Azazel had drilled into him a healthy admiration for females, Naruto made sure it never got out of hand. She wore a loose shirt with slight ruffles at the bottom that somehow seemed to cover up her body. Accompanying it was a pair of blue jeans, some simple outdoor shoes, and no jewelry, as if she knew she didn't need it to turn the heads of everyone on the street. Quickly sweeping his eyes downwards, he noticed a bit of gravel stuck to her pant leg as he crouched down and gently swatted it off, causing the girl to let go of his hand as she seemed to realize what she was doing as a blush of embarrassment lit up her cheeks, only serving to amplify the girl's beauty. When he saw her, only one thought passed through his mind: beautiful, before he had to force himself to stop staring at her. Naruto noticed that the way Mana seemed to float around her was slightly different, though it also seemed rough and unnatural, almost like Mana was being made to do something it normally wouldn't. "It's not your fault, I was also distracted," the girl stated after flashing him a grateful smile as he stood back up and looked back at her eyes. "I thought I had noticed an old friend, but it seems I was mistaken." The warmth in her eyes dimmed ever so slightly as her smile seemed to be a little harder to maintain. "Ah, I know that feeling. I have quite a few old friends I haven't seen in a few years as well," Naruto replied with a soft distracted smile as his eyes crumpled slightly in sadness and regret. "Though that doesn't change the fact that I had knocked you over can't be so easily forgotten. Normally I would accompany you to wherever you were going and make sure you got there okay. Sadly I'm in quite a bit of a rush, so I won't be able to do that. Though if we ever run across each other again, I promise to help you out however you need it. Is that a good enough deal?" Naruto asked as he relaxed before flashing an apologetic guilty smile at her as he reached up to brush his bangs out of his eyes. "TCH, damn bangs are getting too long," Naruto whispered to himself as his face slightly warped before returning to the unreadable smile he had become so used to wearing while in the Grigori. At this point, his bangs on the left side of his head had reached his shoulder, while Lavinia had only braided it halfway as the rest was left loose. "The FFT, you don't need to worry about anything like that," the girl as she let out one of the most beautiful sounds Naruto had ever heard. Then she slightly stepped forward and stepped on her toes before reaching towards his hair and brushing his bangs back in a way that prevented them from falling down easily before she locked her hands behind her back and stepped away from him. "You can think of it as me repaying you for dusting off the gravel that had stuck to my leg," she said with a smile before she slightly stepped to the side. "Well, I don't want to hold you up, so I'll let you be on your way." Naruto was about to thank her and head off before he hesitated, yet the reason for doing so escaped him. Sigh, "Well, thank you for the help, and once again I apologize for bumping into you. I hope you can find the friend that you were looking for." "Oh right, my name is Naruto by the way." Naruto sighed as he flashed the beautiful woman a small smile before he turned and quickly moved through the crowd, having noticed that something in the plaza nearby caused his target to stall, meaning he was closer than Naruto thought he would be. "Yes, I hope I find him as well," the girl muttered as she followed the now named Naruto with her eyes before she looked down in confusion at her slightly outstretched hand. If he had not moved away so quickly he might have even noticed the way she instinctively reached out to try and stop him from leaving. "It appears I found something quite curious," the girl thought as her eyes twinkled and her lips curled up in a childish curiosity and excitement. Quickly hopping over the roofs, Naruto stealthily followed after his target. By now they had moved out of the inner city and were venturing around the outer edge, which bordered a rather large forest that was most likely going to be cut down in a few years for expansion. A few blocks back, Naruto decided to ditch the casual clothes as they were too restrictive and switch to something Azazel had tailor-made for him a few weeks ago. He wore a black shirt with no sleeves. It came with dark gray pants and black leg wraps that kept his ankle and thigh protected, while the clothes provided little protection. They had wards that helped him protect his important organs while focusing more on assassination than frontal attacks, and hidden beneath a large cloth tied around his waist was a storage seal that he could activate from the other side. Draped on his shoulder was a dark gray short robe that only reached his waist. It had long wide sleeves and could be easily discarded with short gold tassels hanging from the bottom. It served no real purpose other than hiding his hand from making magic seals or hand signs. And to wrap it all up, there were two black gloves on his hands that left his fingers uncovered as well as his thumb to not restrict its movement. The other benefit the robe had was that it had wards that made it harder to notice his presence, supposedly derived from one of God's latent abilities that Michiel now wielded. Quickly shifting his thoughts back to the present, Naruto noticed his target was starting to slow down, most likely nearing the base where he and the other 4 stray exorcists were hiding. Normally Naruto would have simply marked his target with the Hiration seal, which he had partially grasped over the last year. While he could not traverse an entire continent with it, he could still travel the length of Italy if he pushed it. The reason why he didn't try and mark him was because most stray exorcists that abandoned the Grigori were familiar with him, as he hunted quite a few over the last year. If the exorcist, who originally was contracted by the Grigori, recognized him, it would have ruined the whole plan. As for why such a detestable person was contracted, Naruto couldn't fathom, though he would not voice his opinion as he knew it was necessary. Hoping across a new roof, Naruto noticed the plain-looking exorcist look around suspiciously. Why all of them did that he had no idea, before slipping into an alley and then into a hidden door that led him into a hidden house. Closing his eyes, Naruto spread his senses out more and focused on the area around him to see if he could notice any more emotions. His eyebrows furrowed as he thought he sensed something at the edge of his sensory ability, though it was gone almost immediately. Focusing on the hidden house, Naruto noticed 3 other beings meeting his target and another a layer down, and guessed that he was in a basement. His face twitched as he focused a little more and noticed 3 other signatures, worrying that Azazel's intel was wrong, though that thought was quickly discarded as he noticed there was no malice in the 3, but instead fear, depression, and hate, though the fear grew immensely as the 5th militia signature seemed to approach the 3 fearful ones. Quickly realizing what the 3 most likely were, Naruto's expression became abnormally cold as he realized what the man was most likely about to do. I was supposed to observe, but I can't leave those 3 here. Why do none of my big missions ever go according to plan? Originally it was Tazuna, then the Herbert me and Volley hunted, which led to the Sage, plus that mission half a year ago where I almost got labeled a terrorist and am now no longer allowed in most of Brazil and all of Bolivia. And now this, despite his inner complaining, Naruto was already checking the seals and stretching his body in preparation for the impromptu manhunt that was about to commence. Doing a quick recount of their specialties, Naruto chose who he would eliminate first. I should probably aim for the alchemist and the shadow traversal one, as transmutation can be forbidden quite easily and dealing with shadow movement is always annoying. I can deal with the spear and blade ones, leaving the 2 weakest, the twice critical and staring blue, or Quincy knockoff, as Azazel prefers to call it. By the time Naruto had outlined his plan, he was already slipping quietly through the door, using a small silencing spell Azazel had taught him a few weeks ago to help him with slipping past people quietly or breaking into houses. Slipping through the hallway, Naruto kept close track of the 1 exorcist downstairs, prepared to throw caution to the wind the moment he sensed him get too close to the group of 3 and flash to the exorcist's side and cause enough chaos to make him pause. So that he could get down there and deal with him. Rounding a corner, Naruto came to an end and paused as he heard voices on the other side and realized the 4 exorcists were located in there. Slightly glancing in, Naruto realized 2 of them had their backs to the door, though the 2 he could recognize were the alchemist and staring blue exorcist. That I can confirm where one of the more annoying targets is and deal with him quickly, though I don't know who the other 2 are. With that thought, Naruto continued past a room after realizing a transformed clone in the form of a rat into the room to mark one of the exorcists, now believing that the risk of getting caught was worth it as they were all close together, and to the door at the end of the hall that he could confirm led to the basement from his previous sense of where the exorcist below him was at. Quickly making his way to the door, Naruto praised his luck as he noticed that the exorcist didn't bother with closing it. Making his way down the stairs, Naruto paused at the second door to the basement as he noticed biblical runes lining the doorframe. Most likely security magic to alert the creator of any uninvited guest, though I wonder why there wasn't any on the front door. Fucking idiots, Naruto grumbled before tsking in annoyance as he noticed he was cussing more often. The crow is a bad influence on me, though Kokobiel and Barakwil are also partially to blame. Quickly running a hand over the runes, Naruto used a branch of his law to rewrite the runes and make it to where he was allowed entry. Looking through the doorway, Naruto saw the man turn away from him and finally start to approach the 3 girls that were chained to the far wall, though his expression froze as he noticed something along the wall's bodies, 10 maybe 12 of them, all mutilated beyond recognition and looking as if they had suffered greatly before dying. Naruto quickly realized that he had guessed wrong as to what the exorcist planned to do and couldn't suppress the quickly building rage. While his moral compass had been skewered due to Azazel practically raising him for the last 3 years, he still retained a lot of his morals. He was just more reluctant to go too out of his way, unless it was truly bad. Thus there is no reason to bother with mercy or kindness. Grazing a seal on his sleeve, Naruto felt a Hiration kunai slip out of the wide sleeve and fall perfectly into his hand. Supposedly the exorcist before him was the oldest and most experienced, so he would notice the kunai fly at him, though Naruto doubted he would be prepared for Naruto to flash beside him. Letting his arm trace an arc backward, Naruto carefully calculated the path he wanted the blade to follow before his arm shot forward and let the thin blade fly. He watched as the exorcist tensed up before moving out of the way, though he was a moment too slow as Naruto had already appeared with a second kunai in his hand, aimed for the man's throat. Naruto watched as the man's eyes widened only to feel his mimic the action as he saw the man melt into shadows, similar to how his shadow clones were displeased. Bang tsk, so they sent someone to eliminate us like I guessed, though I never would have guessed they would send Azazel's hunting dog himself. The shadow user said as he slammed the door shut before runes spread across the room, causing all noise and sensory abilities to become ineffective. Naruto also quickly noticed that he could no longer sense his Hiration mark. Like it. It's a nifty seal that makes this place equivalent to a separate reality or dimension from the real one. The grizzled 40 or 50-year-old man said as he looked at Naruto, who let out an annoyed growl. He had a surprisingly good-looking face with 2 scars running across it and mostly gray hair, most likely due to stress. I'm a dog now, am I? Naruto growled as he opted to ignore the second sentence in exchange for figuring out how this sealed space worked. Though your fancy space doesn't matter, as soon as you die it will disappear. Ah, that's only if you can kill me. The man arrogantly proclaimed, though it wasn't baseless as almost the entire room was cloaked in shadows except for the girls, a small area by the door, and the space Naruto was lighting up with minor light manipulation he had learned from Lavinia. As for the dog comment, it is what most strat exorcists have come to call you due to your constant hunting of us due to Azazel's orders, though he is probably just doing it so you have enough experience, like with his pet lizard, Volley. The grizzled man explained casually as he and Naruto sized each other up. Naruto moved to a spot where he could more easily protect the girls in an emergency. If you are worried that the other 4 have noticed the seal, don't worry, tend to use it for my alone time. The man said as a disgusting expression covered his face and he licked his lips like a predator looking at its prey. You're a revolting person. Naruto expressed his disgust with his tone, words, and expression as his body slightly shook from the building rage. He shifted slightly as 4 bluish magic seals appeared at his side, 2 on each side. Quickly 3 sharp and dense icicles shot from 2, the one on the bottom left and top right, as the other one on the left shot out a chain of ice in an attempt to restrict him, and the bottom right one made the temperature plummet and covered about 80% of the shadows in a layer of ice, making the inaccessible. Shooting forward, Naruto grazed a different seal, and a surprisingly nice katana appeared in his hand. He used a Hiration mark he had left on one of the icicles to flash to the side of the exorcist, and before he could react, Naruto had already channeled lightning through his muscles and used the wind to sharpen his blade and reduce air resistance as it smoothly and impossibly quickly made contact with the man's neck before cutting through it like a hot knife through butter. Quickly using a bit of magic, Naruto created a barrier and prevented any of the blood from splashing on him. Thud. As Naruto indifferently watched the man's body fall to the ground, he used a bit of spatial magic to seal his head in a pocket dimension for proof of kill later. Then he summoned a small flame relying on his primordial chakra to skip the hand seal process and tossed it at the body. Due to using primordial chakra, which is much more potent than normal chakra and equally draining, the normally small flame touched the man's body before rapidly expanding and devouring the blood and body in a matter of moments. Looking around, Naruto didn't notice anything and decided to walk towards the girls. He paused as the 3 cringed in fear, finally noticing their malnourished looks and the fact that they didn't have anything to cover them than a few rags that didn't do all that much. "Sigh, you need not worry, I have no intention of harming you 3, Naruto said as he approached. Though I doubt you will believe me. He added mentally. Reaching into his right sleeve, he pulled out 3 large blankets from a seal and tossed them so that it would cover them before bringing food from a separate section of his pocket dimension. Then he kept the bodiless head in. Here, you should eat this. I plan to go and deal with the 4 upstairs, so in around 10 minutes, I want you 3 to head up and leave for the nearest police station. By that point they should be dead or have already run off. Though it would be great if you wouldn't mention my appearance. I don't need any more warrants for my arrest put out." He added the last part with a chuckle as he realized they might tell the cops about him. With those words, Naruto stood up and walked towards the door, preparing to use his sage to disable it and then flashed to the other marked exorcist. Placing his hand on the door, Naruto felt the emotions return to his senses and felt his Hiration mark return. Opening his mouth, he switched to the law branch and flashed into the room he had spied earlier. He watched as their eyes widened, yet they reacted quickly, though he was quicker. While 3 jumped away and prepared themselves, he noticed the alchemist move to slam his hand against the ground as his glove already had a seal etched on it, though before he could make contact with the ground, the sentence Naruto had uttered finally appeared within the ears of the room's occupants and took effect. The unnatural altering of the form of an object is prohibited in this area. With that law taking effect, the alchemist was unable to produce any results and was quickly beheaded by Naruto, who was still using lightning and wind magic while holding his sword. Quickly turning on his heel, he dashed towards the closest person, who was ironically the one who excelled in long range, and cut the arrow that was headed towards his head before he used more lightning magic and appeared at his side in a flash of silvery blue light. Swinging his blade up, he left a whitish arcing trail that resembled a crescent moon as the archer's top half of his body fell to the ground, only to tilt his sword at an angle to protect himself from the fist that sent him flying through 3 walls and into the alley behind him. It was at this moment of reprieve that Naruto noticed a 6th stray exorcist had arrived and was in the room with the others. Looking up, he shot to the side as he finally got a good glimpse at the man. He had short white hair and eyes the color of blood. He wore a crazed smile and was currently shouting something about pleasure and gutting something, though Naruto was more focused on the other 2 that were currently fleeing. Looking at the man off to the side with a grimace, as he was now hugging himself with a rather off-putting expression, he quickly decided that he was less important than the other 2 and decided to ignore him in favor of hunting down the other, more important targets. But that thought, he shot towards the man, who reacted surprisingly quickly as he parried Naruto's blade, though he failed to react as Naruto's hand came around and grabbed his sleeve before doing a spinning flip over the man and hurling him into a building and through a few walls. With a final glance and a confirmational scan, Naruto shot toward the woods in search of the present. Dodging to the side, Naruto narrowly dodged the spear that came uncomfortably close to his eye as he retreated backward from the spear user, who had switched to using the spear instead of remotely controlling it, though he had not dropped in lethality, but instead had become even more dangerous despite only having one working arm. For someone who seems to prefer killing from a distance, you are quite skilled. Naruto complimented as he stretched and shook his legs to get the kinks out and keep the blood flowing. I am actually a very cowardly person who prefers to avoid frontal confrontations if possible, but my sacred gear forced me to learn how to fight in close combat, thus I decided to go all out and make sure I wouldn't lose if I was forced into a fight. The plain-looking exorcist explained as he and Naruto started to circle each other. I guess that matches, you avoid frontal confrontation, but enjoy torturing helpless people, Naruto growled out as he adjusted his grip on his katana so as to fight off a spear. Surprise flashed across Naruto's face as he saw the exorcist pause as a grimace passed over his features. I take it you are referring to the basement, then you can forget that. I was excommunicated because I learned a secret I shouldn't have and tried to let everyone know. I ended up killing some higher-ups when they came to silence me. He explained as he summoned up the last bit of magic to summon his most powerful spear, a spear made solely of angelic metal, the same type of metal used to forge the strongest of the true holy swords, though less pure. Though that doesn't change the fact that I fully intend to kill you here even if you have done nothing wrong. Naruto stayed silent, not knowing how to respond. He simply lowered his stance and showed that he was aiming to kill as well, as fast and painless as possible, as a mercy to this person who was more innocent than he had believed. Gripping his katana, Naruto shifted his stance before calling on his lightning magic once again and charged at the exorcist, preparing to kill him as quickly as possible with a sideways swipe towards his abdomen. Reacting almost immediately, the exorcist brought his spear down low and deflected the edge of the katana upwards after hitting the side of the blade with the tip of his spear. Showing his skill with the sacred gear, he chose to let go of his spear before Naruto could react and use the built-in telekinesis to flip it around and plunge it down at Naruto's skull. Though Naruto, who had already been expecting to fail, mentally reached out to a seal he had left with his foot before he rushed in and teleported out of harm's way. He let his arms fall down to his side before he released one of his hands and make a sign to summon a clone to his side. As soon as the clone appeared, he quickly raised his empty hands as Naruto didn't summon him with a blade and started to create magic seals with the help of the sage, which allowed him to use multiple different spells at once, despite his rather amateurish ability when it came to spell casting. Meanwhile, the original Naruto directed the lighting more to his nerves than muscles, losing a bit of speed but replacing it with a much faster reaction time. So you can create physical clones capable of acting separately from the body. How very annoying you are. The exorcist growled as he saw the numerous seals appear across from him, as well as what he guessed to be the original one rush at him at a noticeably slower speed, though still unreasonably fast for a human nonetheless. Grabbing the spear, he decided to shadow the original to dodge the spells as best as possible while trying to deal with the close-range original before his katana took out his other shoulder. Quickly shooting forward, Naruto felt his clone activate the sage, which similarly caused his mind to speed up and perceive the world much slower, while also linking his mind with the clone, allowing them to plan together without talking. Thinking ahead, Naruto tried to figure out what was most dangerous about his opponent and how to disable it quickly. His other shoulder. No, that is too complicated since he will be expecting it. Mark him and flash in. No, I showed that twice now, so he is probably cautious against it. That only leaves the telekinesis. He's only seen that once, so he should be prepared for it, having an ability similar to the White Tower's future sight. Oh well, guess I'll just wing it. Naruto decided before he flipped his katana over and dropped towards the ground. He saw his opponent's eyes flash in surprise, as instead of him knocking Naruto's blade upwards, Naruto's blade was now under his spear and had knocked it up, completely reversing the situation. Having prepared to exchange multiple attacks, Naruto was surprised to notice how easy it was to disarm his opponent. Then Naruto prepared himself for what he knew was coming, and just as he expected, two things simultaneously happened. The first was the exorcist letting go of his spear in an attempt to use his telekinesis, and at the same time, Naruto heard a voice that seemed to be regal yet relaxed and carried with it a desire to make everything around it submit to it and obey. The manipulation of objects separated from one's main body is forbidden. Being deprived of his ability without being able to react had caught the exorcist so off guard that he could not even defend himself, as Naruto's blade barely missed his stomach and plunged in between his important arteries. Quickly snapping back to reality when he felt a palm land on his chest, he ripped himself off of the blade and moved a few feet away as blood dripped from the corner of his lips before he looked up. "Sorry, I meant for that to kill you immediately." Those were the final words he heard before he felt a cold wind appear behind him and noticed that the clone from earlier had disappeared. And the faintest sensation of something touching his neck appeared before the entire world flipped upside down before fading to crimson, then nothing. Staring at his clone who had just beheaded the exorcist with a katana coated in primordial chakra-infused flames, Naruto sighed as he turned and walked to look at the spear that was about to break down and dissipate. Sighing once more, Naruto crushed the rune-covered spear with his foot, turned away, and started to head back to town as he dispelled the clone. "That's all that's left is to deal with that weird pervert exorcist, then I can head to the airport and meet up with Emilia." With that thought, Naruto vanished from the forest in a flash of gold, never noticing the two people standing in the air who had been observing his different battles. In the sky, "That boy is quite skilled, isn't he?" Milady, the pale golden-haired blue-eyed woman, spoke as she turned to look at the person whom she had been looking for almost the entire day. "Well, you have disappeared before. I believe this is the first time you have disappeared for an entire day. And to observe a boy nonetheless." She spoke with a relaxed tone despite the fact that she knew just how vastly wide the power gap between her and the being before her was. Choosing not to answer or explain herself, the figure continued to stare at the spot where Naruto had been walking before he flashed away. If nothing else, will you please let me know why the boy is so important as to have you following him around for almost an entire day? Lord Michelle was quite worried about you." The young 20-something woman spoke once again. This time she finally got a reaction as the figure turned to look at her. If Naruto was here, he would be shocked to recognize the girl as the one he had run into before, though she looked different now as she was slightly older, taller, now standing at 5'6" or 5'7", and had a much more domineering aura, one you would expect from a royal or an extremely powerful being whom Mana itself submitted to. "They used the law earlier, something that belongs exclusively to my old friend. I thought I had sensed him earlier and wanted to seek him out since that boy appeared wielding the law instead. Then that means he has passed. I want you to see if you can discover any information about who that boy is, who he currently allies himself with, and if it's possible to get him on our side for the coming war. As for my brother, I will go talk to him personally." The girl, who now had a string that kept a beautiful piece of angelic steel on her forehead, spoke in a relaxed voice, as if she wasn't standing hundreds of feet above the ground without anything seemingly keeping her afloat, unlike her companion who had 6 pure white wings extending from her back. "I see. I will look for the relevant information immediately, Lady Gabriel," and with those words she disappeared into a teleportation circle. As the now named Gabriel turned back to stare at the spot Naruto had been before leaving as well, with only a few faint words left behind to accompany the small warm smile on her face and the sparkle of excitement and playfulness that appeared in her eyes as she departed. "I look forward to our next meeting, my dear Whiskers." In the air above the sea 2 hours later, after having wasted almost 2 hours trying to track down the last exorcist and failing, since he had abandoned the marked cleric robe early on in his leaving, Naruto decided to head to the airport and return to the Grigori with Emilia, who was on a recruiting job for a sacred gear user Azazel had heard was in the area. By now they were already on the private plane and headed towards Osaka, where Azazel had told them he and Barakiel had headed for some business that Azazel said he would explain upon their reunion. The trip was already annoyingly long, taking more than 12 hours one way, but they would have to make 4 stops along the way, one to pick up Volley, one to pick up the Slash-Dog team, and one to get something for Azazel in Brazil, though Naruto was advised to not leave the plane at that stop, and the last to drop Emilia and the sacred gear user off at a Grigori entrance. So the 12-hour flight would actually total almost a week long. None of them are the same, I already knew that, but it still saddens me. Quietly gazing at the stars outside of the window, Naruto slightly stirred as he heard faint footsteps approach him from the end of the private plane. Before she actually entered his sight, the smell of moon lilies and vanilla entered his sense of smell, letting him know exactly who was approaching. "You should be resting, you used a lot of magic and chakra in your mission earlier." A faint melodious voice that seemed to lull the people who heard it echoed out from beside Naruto as he turned his head to gaze at one of the other three inhabitants of the plane. Before Naruto never took the time to actually take in her appearance due to his distraction by the information she was providing or the fact he was arguing with Vali about what country produced the best food, they eventually agreed that Italy, Japan, and China were their top three, though disagreed on the order, with Greek and Spanish coming up next. She stood at a solid 5'6" with long black hair mixed with silver strands that ended at her knees and two bangs that fell into her face. She had pure black eyes that seemed like they went on forever, long black eyelashes, and white skin that contrasted greatly to her hair and eyes. Currently, she was wearing casual clothes and a small bracelet that had a beautiful blue gem embedded in it, supposedly a part of the sacred gear Azazel had created and given her. "I am fine, I was simply enjoying the view and didn't feel like moving," Naruto replied in a distant tired voice. However, the type of tired was not a physical or mental exhaustion, but instead an emotional one before he turned back to look out through the window. "Are you comparing the stars and constellations to the ones from your world?" Amelia asked as she took the seat opposite his and joined him in stargazing. "I heard from Lord Azazel that you had a tendency to do that." "Haha, yes I am, it appears no matter what world you visit the stars are always beautiful. I had an old friend who enjoyed cloud watching, though even now I can't understand why. I prefer to be up and moving during the day and relaxing at night, maybe it had to do with him being a shadow user or he was just stupidly lazy, haha." Naruto couldn't help but chuckle as he thought back to his old friend and ally. "Do you miss your old world?" Amelia asked, not truly knowing what he was going through. While the two had become friends over the year they had done some missions together, Amelia was busy working for Shemhazai and didn't have time to casually hang out as Naruto did with Lavinia, Azazel, and Vali. At this point, Naruto was beginning to grow tired and barely recognized he was still talking. I know, but at times like this I wish I could simply return home and forget about all the problems and fears haunting me lately. I've been thinking about my being here and realized that if I were to disappear almost no one would know, and a majority that would know would only remember all the lives I had taken. I realized, even though I had been here for more than 3 years, I still don't truly belong in this world. The more I think about it, the larger the distance seems to grow between me and everyone else in my eyes. It is so unbearably lonely at times, despite being surrounded by people I call friends. I just don't know what to do." Naruto sighed before letting loose all the thoughts he had kept bundled up over the past few months as he slowly sank farther and farther into the abyss of his own thoughts. He knew that Amelia was using some magic, most likely related to her sacred gear, to make him more open and relaxed, but he couldn't truly care at the moment and simply talked about his worries and grief. Intending to close his eyes to rub them, Naruto failed to do that as he fell asleep almost immediately after his eyes closed. "I apologize, but I am unable to help you or understand your sadness. All I can do is make sure your dreams don't drag you down any further." Amelia apologized to the now sleeping blonde who was seated across from her as she grabbed the blanket that lay beside him and used it to cover him up as she brushed some stray hair out of his face. "Good night my friend, sweet dreams." Osaka 1 week later. Finally it was getting so damn stuffy on that stupid plane. "I don't understand why we couldn't just teleport here." Vali growled in annoyance as he finally left the plane that he had been stuck on for almost 5.5 days. "That would have ruined all the fun," came, in Vali's opinion, an unnecessarily happy voice from the side. Turning his head, Vali saw his current boss and guardian wearing one of those annoyingly happy smiles that usually implied trouble for him and Naruto. Azazel was, for once, not wearing a suit but instead had on a light gray t-shirt and blue jeans, seemingly intending to spend the day exploring and relaxing. Following behind him was Barakiel, who was also dressed casually. "Fun for you usually means chaos for anyone else," came a third voice as Naruto stepped off of the plane and came to a stop at Vali's side, with the Slash Dog team following behind the duo. "Though at least your chaos is interesting in the end," Naruto said before he chuckled. "Don't encourage him, his ego is big enough already, besides you're just as bad with the fact danger seems to find you, no matter where you go." Vali grumbled as he rubbed his temples, trying to stave off the headache he could already feel forming. "Haha, don't worry, we aren't doing anything too dangerous. We just have a meeting with the leader of Kyoto, Yusaka Haim, to talk about something, though there might be a small problem. Forget that for now, and let's relax for the next 2 days." Azazel exclaimed happily at the end before walking off of the airstrip, showing he had no intention of talking about what the slight problem might be. "I fucking knew this would happen," Vali growled lowly as the headache came full force as all the different problems that could happen started to pop up in his head one after another. None of them were good, and most ended with an all-out war against the Shinto pantheon. Not that Vali was against the idea. "Relax, my friend. Well, Azazel may be quite chaotic, as long as the two of us and Barakiel are there, we should be able to keep it calm. Plus Shemhazai would not have let Azazel leave if he thought this was too dangerous. If he even knows what's happening, we should probably check in with him, shouldn't we?" Naruto asked as he realized something was off about this situation after all. It wouldn't be the first time Azazel omitted certain details so that Shemhazai wouldn't stop him. As soon as Naruto saw Volley nod, he decided to contact Shemhazai once they got to where they were staying for the next 2 days. However, they wouldn't get a chance as Azazel proceeded to drag them around for 2 days visiting arcades, watching movies, and eating practically everywhere. Before they went out to eat dinner on the second night and ended up extremely drunk when they were supposed to be leaving soon. Osaka 3 days later. I can't believe you all actually decided to stay another day, Volley sighed as he watched Naruto and Azazel scramble to get all their clothes and other items together so that they could teleport over to Barakiel, who had left for Kyoto yesterday alongside the Slash Dog team as there was a stray Grigori wizard they were hunting and needed to meet a contact. Meanwhile, Naruto and Azazel had stayed behind since Naruto wanted to explore more places and Azazel didn't see any need to arrive early. Volley simply stayed to keep the two out of trouble. It was only now at 10 in the morning that the two realized just how stupid of a decision that was and was currently trying to get ready as quickly as possible while Volley sat on one of the chairs and simply observed them coolly. There was so much to see I just couldn't pass up the chance to explore, Naruto replied as he grabbed the last of his extra clothes and sent them to his pocket dimension. Currently, he was wearing his combat clothes and was trying to get his bangs to stay up on his head the same way that girl he bumped into made them, yet he just couldn't get it right so after struggling for a bit, he sighed and just let them hang down and would push them up occasionally. Besides, this place is extremely similar to my world with its customs, so that just makes it even more interesting, Naruto added as his eyes lit up in excitement, though his expression quickly gave way to one of embarrassment. Still, we might have stayed a little too long. With that, Azazel, who had left the room at some point, burst through the door and grabbed both Volley and Naruto. Alright, no dawdling, let's go Naruto, you have a mark on Barakiel, right? Azazel paused before asking as he knew Hiration was faster. Yup, hold tight and don't throw up on me. With those words, Azazel and Volley's sight was covered in a flash of light. Before they could even fully process the flash of light, it had already faded and they were now standing next to Barakiel, who appeared to be in a small standoff with 3 other groups. Surprise flickered over the expression of all those there, with the exception of Barakiel and one other, who simply smiled as she saw the flash appear. However, the surprise disappeared as the other groups, except the girl, tensed in preparation for an attack, only to be surprised to see 2 16-year-olds and an obviously nauseous Azazel appear from the flash. I'm gonna puke. Azazel moaned as he slightly bent over while placing his hand on his knees. His face had taken a green tint and did not look good. The 3 at the forefront of the other groups raised their eyebrows in confusion, while the girl just giggled. Barakiel meanwhile was dragging his hand down his face and trying not to show his embarrassment at his leader's actions. The only rule is you can't throw up on me. Throw up on Valor Bara, if you throw up on me I'm dumping your feathered ass in a volcano and leaving you there. Naruto replied as he quickly took a few steps away from Azazel while showing an expression that conveyed both his annoyance and slight disgust. Don't offer me up as a sacrificial lamb, you damned Goldie. Volley was just as quick as he also moved back and stood near Naruto and out of Azazel's range. Calm down you two, I'm good now, Azazel said with a chuckle as he slowly stood back up with the colors in his face slowly returning. However, that did nothing for the boys as they continued to look at him with cautious expressions as they moved to the other side of Barakiel and away from Azazel. Oh, you little bastards. I just said I'm fine. He grumbled. Naruto opened his mouth to respond but was cut off by one of the other group speaking. How nice of you to finally join us, Azazel. Came a cool, slightly indifferent voice from the far left. The 2 boys turned their heads to see a group of 6 standing there, 1 adult and 5 children, though one of the children looked to be in her late teens. The one leading the group and the one who had just spoken was a tall man with shoulder-length crimson hair in his 20s with aquatic blue eyes. He had a slightly exasperated expression. To his side stood the second oldest looking one with black hair tied into twin tails and blue eyes. She wore an expression that showed she was amused, though trying to hide it. After that was a miniature version of the man, but a female with hair flowing to her waist who looked to be 15, she was currently frowning for some reason. Beside her was a girl with long black hair tied into a ponytail with a red ribbon, with 2 strands of hair sticking out from the top and slopping backward. She was currently wearing a traditional Maiko attire, consisting of a white haori with red accents and a red hakama. Her expression was the most surprising to the duo as she was glaring at Barakiel with unbidden rage. Next to her stood a bespectacled 15-year-old with black hair styled in a short bob cut and violet eyes with a curious and slightly tense expression. Standing to her side was a young bespectacled woman with long straight black hair that extended all the way down to her knees, with split bangs and heterochromatic eyes, with a violet left eye and a light brown right eye. She had a wary gaze that swept across most of the people there. Currently, the group of 6, with the exception of the Maiko girl, were sweeping their eyes over the Grigori members, not just Azazel, but also Naruto and Vali. The second group was smaller with only 3 people. The one in the front wore an annoyed expression as she glared at Azazel, who was currently rubbing his head in embarrassment. She was a young woman with a voluptuous figure and very long blonde hair with matching eyes. She is a woman with delicate facial features, and her eyebrows are cut very short and round, a symbol of nobility. Her hair is usually tied in a loose ponytail, reaching all the way down to her legs that end in a spiral, with taut bandages to keep it in place. She usually wears a traditional shrine maiden attire, and over that, she wears a white coat held closed by a red ribbon and a golden crown. Beside her stood 2 indifferent men with bull horns and armor. They held spears tightly in their hands, as if prepared for a fight to break out. Sweeping their gazes to the last group, they noticed that all of these members were blonde. The first was a kind-looking man with a small trace of disappointment on his face as he gazed at Azazel. He was a man with long blonde hair and green eyes. Like Azazel, he has 12 wings growing from his back, though his wings are pure gold. He wears a red robe with a gold cross on the front of his white alb. Beside him stood a handsome young man with dirty blonde hair, green eyes, and dressed in priest clothes. He had 10 pure white wings. Next to him was a woman with pale golden-haired blue eyes. She wore a tunic, belt, scapular, and veil, which were all black. Under the veil is a white headdress. Naruto and Vali turned their heads to gaze at the last person, only for Naruto to freeze as he saw her. At this point, everyone had stopped looking at the boys, with the girls their age glancing over every once in a while, yet the final person had not. Instead, she was looking at Naruto with a playful and warm smile. When she noticed his gaze, she winked at him. Of course, Naruto's freezing was expected. Just from a quick look, Vali could guess one thing: that girl was the person Naruto met in Aurelio, and she currently had 12 pure white wings extending from her back. Room in Yakai Palace, 11:15 p.m. To say Naruto was confused was an understatement. The sweet and admittedly stunning girl that Naruto had met while in Aurelio had turned out to not only be a part of the supernatural world, but was also an angel. The race that stood directly against the fallen whom Naruto worked for. Of course, if that wasn't bad enough, she just so happened to be Azazel's sister, which automatically made her one of the 6 primordial angels that the biblical god created near the beginning of his rise to become a worshipped deity, and the only female angel amongst them was Gabriel, the very angel who he wished to meet due to their overlapping sensor abilities in the emotional domains and the fact she was probably one of the most knowledgeable beings when it came to Merlin's magic. Now he was in one of the rooms that Yusaka had prepared for the fallen angel entourage, lying on his bed and thinking about how to approach his current situation. Deciding to put the thought of his rather disappointing first meeting with Gabriel in the back of his mind for now, Naruto focused on the other dignitaries, or to be more specific, the ones his and Vali's age. Originally, Naruto assumed the 4 to be special cases or promising upcoming devils like him and Vali, though he quickly dismissed that thought as he noticed the similarities between the 2 Satans, who he recognized from some descriptions Azazel once gave him and what could only be considered the chibi versions of them. From his best guess, he assumed the leading 2 were Satan's siblings and the 2 behind them to be the queens of their peerage, which a Satan sibling would no doubt have. Other than that, he could not guess anything about them, except that the current Lucifer, younger sister's queen, had a serious problem with brachial. Why that was, Naruto hadn't the faintest idea, though he would probably ask him later. SIGH. Naruto exhaled as he moved to stand up. Stretching, he turned his head and looked out the window to see a night sky full of stars, and the moon was about an hour from its peak. This is getting me nowhere. Lady Yusaka did say we were allowed to explore if we wanted. I might as well go and make a snack. Naruto thought as he gathered the shirt that he had discarded after his shower and walked out of the room he was staying in. Originally planning to head straight to the kitchen, Naruto paused as he tilted his head at the door across from him. His lips curled up as his eyes gained a dangerous glint. Snapping his fingers, he set up a small barrier that would block his magic signature from being detected. Walking towards the door, Naruto placed his hand on it and channeled a bit of magic towards his palm and created a small, nearly harmless magic circle. In an instant, the magic seal activated and blew the doors off its hinges and sent it flying into the room behind it with a small boom, which the seal hid. Fuck was all Naruto heard before a small book was chucked at his face, interrupting the sentence he was currently trying to get out. Hey Vali, what are you bang? Naruto took a step back before he dropped into a crouch and covered his nose with his hands as he whimpered slightly in pain. Damn it Vali, what the fuck was that for? Naruto cursed in a somewhat nasally voice due to him still holding his nose. Will you stop bargaining into my room by blowing the door off its hinges, you little pyromania superscript 2, Vali exclaimed as he was not sitting on the edge of his bed, slightly glaring at his friend. What do you even want? It's 11:15 and I'm really not in the mood for any chaos you have come up with. Vali sighed as he relaxed on his bed, his glare slowly changed into a look of exasperation. I wanted to go and grab a bite to eat since I couldn't get to sleep, Naruto responded as he gently rubbed his nose, slowly stood up, and glared childishly at the relaxed-looking Volley. "Oh right, I'm cooking," Naruto added in an afterthought, though he saw Volley perk up at the comment. "Alright, I could go for some food. What do you intend to make?" Volley asked as he got off his bed. Well, his friend was bad at multiple things. He was an excellent cook, a side effect of being an orphan, though apparently, it was a ramen shop owner and his daughter who taught him the finer points, as well as the ones who brought in other types of chefs to help with other foods. Those that didn't hate him for being a jinchuriki though. I don't know yet, either something sweet or some ramen or maybe a bit of both. Naruto thought aloud as he slightly tilted his head in thought. Oh well, I'll figure it out by the time we get there, and if I haven't, I'll just choose to make both. Naruto shrugged as he responded before he turned and walked out, hearing the familiar footsteps of his friend echoing quietly behind him. If you make sweets, make some Bormer alfajors. As for ramen, well, you are the ramen fanatic, so I'll leave it to you. Volley suggested as they made their way to the kitchen. Tilting his head, Volley looked around to see if there was anyone following them, though he failed to spot them. It was odd only he and Naruto were nearby, yet Volley heard a second pair of footsteps for some reason. Looking around a bit more, his eyes eventually paused on the blonde ahead of him and realized the second set of footsteps was coming from him. How odd, I don't think I've ever heard his footsteps. Wonder what he is thinking about. Volley thought as he directed a curious gaze at his friend. Naruto was raised in a village full of assassins and constantly surrounded by people who hated him. He was an expert when it came to being quiet. One of his biggest accomplishments was being a ninja while wearing a neon orange jumpsuit. So for Volley to hear Naruto's footsteps, even if Naruto trusted him second to none, it was still extremely odd and concerning. The duo quickly arrived at the kitchen and Volley sat at the small table. The kitchen Naruto had walked to was different from the one used to prepare food for feasts or large gatherings, but instead one of the small kitchens for family meals that Yusaka had permitted the three factions to use. Walking to the pantry, Naruto quickly riffled through it in search of the different ingredients he would need. Having not decided what he wanted to make, Naruto decided to make the two suggestions of Volley and some ramen paired with Inagi. He was glad they were currently in Japan, as any other country was unlikely to have the ingredients he needed. Quickly gathering everything he needed and taking the rest out of a storage seal on his person, Naruto made his way to the counter and prepared to start cooking. Knowing it would be a bit before the 4 dishes were done, Volley pulled out a book on Norse magic and picked up from where he had left off after chucking it at Naruto. Speaking of the blonde former assassin, he was currently making his way about the kitchen, having created 3 shadow clones, and was flawlessly making the desserts and meals. However, Volley noticed the 4 pause briefly before continuing to walk, only now his footsteps had returned to their absolute silence. Quickly hearing the reason why Volley noticed footsteps approaching the kitchen, from a quick guess he noticed 2 pairs. The owners of the footsteps eventually revealed themselves as they rounded the corner with obvious curiosity in their eyes, most likely having smelt Naruto's food. However, they paused as they saw 4 identical blondes working in perfect harmony and a silver-haired boy sitting at the island with a small book in his hand as he casually observed them. While the leading girl, the one with red hair, raised an eyebrow in faint amusement and interest. The girl following her though, had her expression sink as she recognized the 2 boys that were a part of the fallen angel entourage. Well, this is definitely an odd sight. The leading Rinnegan spoke in a relaxed, almost childish manner as she noticed the 2 Japanese foods Naruto and his clones were making. Be more specific, are you talking about a blonde idiot with whiskers cooking? Or the fact that there are now 4 identical blonde idiots with whiskers? Volley spoke without looking up from his book, though he quickly tilted his head to dodge the knife that lodged itself in the wall on the other side of the room. Turning his head, he looked at Naruto, who hadn't even turned to face him and was just continuing with his cooking. You 2 are welcome to sit if you 2 are hungry, Naruto said before either of the girls responded to Volley's question. By now he had finished prepping the 3 meals that needed to be put in ovens and finally started cooking them. Well, he finished the ramen he was making for himself. If you 2 have any requests, y'all are free to make them. Naruto paused as he finally turned around to gaze at their unexpected company. We have yet to introduce ourselves to each other, haven't we? Naruto finally asked after he thought back to the day's proceedings. I don't believe we have. The leading Rinnegan responded with an amused smile as she stared at the blonde who stood by the oven. Since we are the ones who appeared unannounced, I think we will introduce ourselves first, she spoke before she took on a serious expression and stepped forward slightly. My name is Rias Gremory, I am the heiress to the Gremory clan and the younger sister of the current Lucifer. Her tone was heavy and serious, completely different from earlier. I am Akeno Himejima, I am the queen of Rias-sama's peerage and a reincarnated devil. The now named Akeno spoke in a slightly indifferent and distant tone, as if she had no real interest in being there or talking to them or introducing herself. The 2 boys momentarily paused as they gazed at the black-haired girl. While they were not particularly close, both boys had interacted with Barakiel quite a few times and were somewhat aware of his relationship with the Himejima clan. Though they didn't know why a Himejima clan member was serving a devil, nor why she seemed to hate Barakiel specifically, and so much at that. "I see, nice to meet you too. My name is Naruto Uzumaki." Naruto responded with a small smile as he dusted bits of powder and sugar off of the small black apron he had found earlier. After doing so he turned to Volley and gave him a rather pointed glare which Volley responded to in kind. After a few seconds, Naruto saw Volley sigh in annoyance and turned to the two girls. "My name is Volley," was his short reply before he turned back to the Norse magic book. "You could at least pretend to be a nice person." Naruto sighed as he turned back to the ramen which was almost done. "You came into my room at 11:15 and blew my door off its hinges, then promised me food. Which I still haven't got yet." Volley shot back with annoyance dripping from his tone. Naruto though didn't respond and instead just glared at Volley, knowing he was being impatient and childish just to annoy him, much like Azazel did whenever Naruto offered to cook their meals, though the beginning part definitely had some credibility to it. "Right, anyways, do you two have any requests?" Naruto asked as he refused to admit he did anything wrong. "I'm good with anything Japanese related, I don't have a preference either way," Rias and Akeno responded in even tones. However, Ria's tone had a hint of excitement and anticipation hidden beneath it. "Alright then, I am making some borma and alfajors for sweets, and some ramen paired with some anagi. Do either of you have a certain ramen preference?" Naruto explained before asking a new question. "Not particularly. You seem to know what you are doing so I'll leave the choice up to you." Rias responded lightly. "Can you make Hakata ramen?" Surprisingly Akeno, the one who seemed to have something against the fallen angels, was the one who requested a certain type of ramen to be made. "Of course," Naruto replied happily as his eyes crinkled slightly and his smile grew. While Naruto didn't mind if people left the food choices up to him, he did prefer when people made certain requests as it made it feel nicer. Why was that? He had no idea. Quickly turning back to the pantry, Naruto went and grabbed the extra ingredients in the process. Missing Akeno slightly turned her head to hide the small blush at Naruto's delighted smile. Though Naruto did hear Volley snort in amusement, he brushed it off. Yakai Castle hallway 12:15 p.m. It is 12:15 Dulio, please remind me once again why we are wandering about the castle so late. Griselda sighed as she stared at the back of her fellow reincarnated angel and the one who held the position of Joker in Michiel's deck. "I told you that someone was making something good. Well, I can't smell it, I just know someone is." Dulio responded in a lazy yet somehow excited tone. "You really are obsessed with food, aren't you?" Griselda asked in exasperation. Already familiar with Dulio's love for sweets and most other types of food, of course, she was aware of the reason why he constantly sought out sweets but never brought it up in public. Currently, Griselda was following Dulio around the Yakai castle as he had knocked on her door a few minutes earlier, asking if she wanted to eat something. Why had he asked her? Simple, Lord Michiel is already asleep and I don't want to bother Lady Gabriel in case she was also sleeping already, was his answer when she had asked. Of course that did not mean she was his last choice, it simply meant that she was the only one of the three he could ask to join who was still awake. Why she had agreed to join him for his late night excursion she could not figure out, but she had, and now she was here wandering around the castle aimlessly relying only on Dulio's gut to guide them. Good, I can see why Volley-san was anticipating the food. A young female voice eventually reached Griselda's ear. She saw Dulio perk up as a wonderful scent hit the two reincarnated angels at the same time, causing them to momentarily pause in surprise at how nice it smelled. Turning her head she went to say something to Dulio, only to realize he was no longer there and had disappeared at some point without her noticing. He really needs to be more careful in a castle full of people who aren't even our allies, she thought before walking to the open door. Kitchen. Hello Thre, of all the people Naruto had expected to see pop up, with him expecting Azazel or even someone like Surzuch, he was without a doubt not expecting to see one of the reincarnated angels. It was for that reason that Naruto and the other three in the room stared at the man who had just waltzed into the kitchen with an overly happy, in Ria's, Akeno, and Volley's opinion, greeting and a warm smile on his face. "Hello?" Naruto responded with a small smile and a raised eyebrow. "Well, I don't mind, I would like to ask why you are here." Naruto left the sentence hanging in the air to signal he didn't know the other party's name. "His name is Dulio Gesualdo, and mine is Griselda Quarta." Surprisingly the voice did not come from Dulio, but instead, the second person who walked in the door, the one Naruto recognized more easily as she was the queen of Gabriel's cards. "As for why we are here, this child said he had a gut feeling that someone was cooking something and decided to look around the castle to find it. I must admit I'm a little annoyed he was right," she explained with a slightly twitchy smile as a shadowy veil seemed to cover her eyes under her hood. "Oh, that's certainly interesting," Naruto said as he scooted behind Volley to avoid being in her direct line of sight. "Though I am cooking food and you two are welcome to join us if you would like." I have finished making the Borma and alfajors. I also went ahead and made extra ramen and anagi in case others showed up, so there's that if you want any. If there is anything else you would like you are welcome to request it," Naruto offered with his smile again returning to his face. "That would be great," Dulio exclaimed as he leisurely approached the table and sat down in one of the empty chairs, followed by Griselda who sat on his left. "I don't think I have actually ever gotten around to trying either of those, so this will be nice," Dulio muttered as he swept his gaze over the gathered foods and his eyes sparkled in excitement. "Plus I do enjoy a good bowl of ramen every once in a while. Thank you for the food." Turning her, Griselda looked at Naruto with a small smile before slightly inclining her head in something reminiscent of a nod of gratitude. Naruto, being Naruto, simply chuckled and waved his hand, stating that it was no problem for him and that he enjoyed cooking. The three duos would then spend an hour chatting and eating as Dulio and Vali bonded over the food. Naruto, Riaz, and Griselda talked about their respective leader's older brother, and Naruto and Riaz lamented the fact they drew the short sticks, and Akeno watched with a slightly amused expression. Eventually, both Riaz and Akeno bid farewell and left the dining room to go back to sleep. While the angels, Naruto, and Vali stayed a little longer to eat and talk about miscellaneous things before they also left for their respective rooms and went to bed. Stretching his hands above his head, Naruto turned to look out his window and gaze at the starry night sky. He sat on the bed and traced the constellations in his mind as he overlapped them with the ones he remembered seeing when he would look at the night sky back in the elemental nations. Home. It was a whisper so faint that even if someone was standing right behind him, they might not have heard it. Yet, the seemingly infinite conflicting emotions carried within it were so deep even Azazel and Vali, who understood him the best, would struggle to figure out what he truly wanted to convey with a word. Even Naruto himself was not completely sure. Yakai Palace Garden 2 days later. Naruto was tired. After 3 hours the first meeting with Yusaka had ended and Naruto was strolling through the garden while Yusaka talked with the devil envoy. How the Yakai Queen was able to sit through those meetings all day was beyond him. From what he had gathered so far from the meeting, the siblings of the two Satans wanted to go to a school in Japan. Michiel and Azazel were worried about them gaining too much leeway with the Shinto pantheon and Yakai, causing the two to want to establish certain restrictions so the devils didn't get too bold in their actions, as well as to make sure no one tried to pin the blame on the angels or Fallen in case the two girls died. Now he was wandering about the garden he had asked one of the servants about, while Vali had headed out of the castle on personal business, having even specifically requested that Naruto not flash to him unless it was a dire situation. Naruto had felt his emotions fluctuate slightly, though nothing so bad that it would worry Naruto. Azazel and Barakiel, meanwhile, were supposed to be working on small issues with the next talk that they wanted to address, though considering the fact their marks didn't seem to be anywhere near their rooms, he guessed they weren't. Stopping, Naruto crouched and brushed a hand over a bundle of red spider lilies that were growing in the garden. He had to admit that whoever cared for this garden did an amazing job. They cared greatly for the flowers and made sure to take care of them daily. "They are quite beautiful, aren't they?" A female voice came from behind Naruto. "Yes, they are. Most of the flowers appear to be arranged in a way that they improve the appearances of those nearby rather than just looking pretty themselves." Naruto responded calmly, having already heard the approaching person's footsteps that they didn't bother trying to conceal. "Care to join me for a chat?" the woman asked. Naruto slightly turned his head to look at her while observing the flowers. Her golden hair still flowed slightly past her waist, except there was now a pure white lily in her hair, most likely a gift from one of the maids or someone else. She was not wearing the formal angel robes nor the clothes that she had first met Naruto in, but instead, a form of Japanese kimono that consisted of a loose-sleeved white top that hid any skin and a light purple bottom half that was held in place by a light purple sash. Her green eyes were warm and playful, which seemed to be almost permanent, with underlying hints of warmth and curiosity. Her shoulders were relaxed with no sign of tension or weight. She wore no jewelry or the ferraniere that she was wearing yesterday when she arrived, allowing the hair to fall unrestricted and some bangs to frame her delicate face, only amplifying her beauty. Though looking more closely using his sensory ability he noticed the way her emotions seemed slightly relaxed, almost completely at odds with how Merlin described her. "I don't mind at all, Lady Gabriel." Naruto responded as the two finished observing each other. Standing up he gestured towards the garden center and got an affirmative nod. With a small smile, the two started to head toward the inner garden where there was a small clearing for picnics or small gatherings. There was a small part of the clearing that had 2 trees that provided a perfect spot for Naruto and Gabriel to sit down and chat in the shade. "You are quite skilled when it comes to fighting." Gabriel was the one who decided to start their conversation after the two got comfortable on the grass. "You saw my hunt in Aurelio, I'm guessing," Naruto replied with a small chuckle. "Yes. Originally I went because I thought I had sensed an old friend's magic, though it turned out I was wrong." Gabriel chose to explain, though Naruto noticed that her emotions seemed to dip as she finished up her sentence. "Merlin right. Naruto asked as he turned his head towards the sky. He could hear Gabriel's hair rustle slightly and felt it when her eyes landed on him. "So my guess is right, you have inherited his magic," Gabriel whispered, knowing her voice would still reach him. Her voice was sad yet also contained hints of relief, as if happy that she finally learned what happened to her friend. After all, if he gave someone his magic and made him his successor, then obviously he fated peacefully. "Yes, I wasn't awake when he appeared, I fell unconscious, and the next thing I knew I was waking up in the Grigori. He saved my life originally, due to the way I ended up unconscious, I should have died, but I'm guessing he appeared and took pity on me, which led to him saving me by giving me the authority." Naruto responded as he closed his eyes and thought back to how much he truly owed the man nicknamed the father of human magic. "I see, it's good to know that he was able to choose a successor before he fated," Gabriel muttered as she directed a brilliant yet sad smile at him. "Anyways, talking about this will do neither of us any good, as it will only push us into memories we likely don't want to deal with right now, so why don't you tell me how far you have delved into the authority, only if you are comfortable letting me know, of course, Whiskers." Gabriel clapped her hands on her cheeks as she let her usual happy personality return to the forefront. Her eyes seemed to sparkle slightly as she asked about his magic, no doubt wanting to find a common interest between them to make the task easier. "Whiskers?" he questioned with an incredulous tone. "Yup," she replied cheerfully, more so than before. "I hadn't learned your name till last night, and so I had to have some way to address you, and I thought it fit, plus it's cute," Gabriel explained while sagely nodding her head with her eyes closed and arms crossed under her chest. "Ugh," he bemoaned. "Just please don't tell Azazel, he already has enough nicknames without others helping him in creating new ones," he begged slightly. "No promises," was her giggled response as she slightly stuck her tongue out and winked at him. "Anyway, on to the magic," she said, choosing to steer them back to the original topic. "Right. So far I have only used the law, the sage, and the beginning parts of the walker, though that branch is much harder than the other two originally were," Naruto replied excitedly, happy to talk to Gabriel about it, considering she was one of Merlin's oldest surviving friends and would be able to help him better understand the branches of the authority. "I have only recently gained the star and still don't know what it's capable of. I have had the law from the moment I became Merlin's heir and have found almost all of the ins and outs of it, along with the sage which I gained about 2 years later," he explained. "I see." Bringing his eyes from the clouds, Naruto turned his head to see Gabriel with her head slightly tilted, her eyes closed, and a slightly thoughtful look on her face. "If I am not mistaken, there were 5 branches to the magic. You already know about the first 3, and I am aware of the 4th one, though I never had a chance to learn the name or abilities of the 5th one. A star, as far as I know, deals mostly with replication, traveling, and strengthening and weakening of all seals. The next one that I know of is often referred to by Merlin as the genie, though I believe the original name for it was the miracle, as it dealt with granting wishes as its primary magic, with theft, shape-shifting, and historical control as subsidiary magics," Gabriel explained in a tone reminiscent of a teacher or instructor. "As for the 5th branch, Merlin was always really jumpy when it came to talking about that one, so I don't know its name nor its focus." "I see, I have already learned a bit about luck manipulation, but I haven't even delved into the timer cycle abilities yet," Naruto muttered to himself as he tried to guess what the main sub-spells of the branches would be. As for the miracle, could it have a form of consciousness or sentence, which is why Merlin would name it something like the genie. Despite talking out loud, Gabriel was able to tell he was talking to himself, though even if he had asked her, she wouldn't have been able to help her give an answer. "I'm very concerned about the 5th branch. If Merlin felt the need to keep it a secret, then it must have been something he didn't like or feel comfortable using," Naruto muttered once again, trying to sort out the various trains of thoughts that were running amok due to his ADHD. "Well, I'm sure you will learn more about them once you delve deeper into them. But for now, I would like to get to know you if you don't mind. I must admit that I'm curious about the person that Merlin chose to make his successor and heir," Gabriel proposed. It had been bothering her since she first guessed he was Merlin's successor. She wanted to know what his personality was like and if he would truly make a good heir to the mage god and wouldn't tarnish his name and reputation. She already knew a little about his personality due to a talk she had with Griselda the day after she and Dulio met him in the kitchen and had a chance to chat with him. Griselda, having known of her curiosity, had manipulated the conversation in a way that helped her learn about his personality, likes, dislikes, and small quirks or interests. Knowing all of this, Gabriel wasn't too interested in confirming most of these things, not right now at least, but instead was interested in confirming his true personality and bearing in a way that was unique to her, through sensing his emotions and looking into his soul and seeing how it felt. "What would you like to know?" Naruto asked, just as curious to learn as much about Gabriel as she wanted to learn about him. Though Naruto could not sense souls and positive emotions, he was adept at reading people, something Azazel had made sure to drill into his head in case he ever met anyone who could offset his negative emotion sensory ability. Not that he believed he ever would, as even Gabriel couldn't fully block him out when she felt sad or her emotions dipped into a sensible range. Whatever you feel comfortable sharing with me, though I do want to ask why you are serving Azazel. Gabriel posed the question in a calm voice. There was no hint of judgment or wariness, but instead, she just seemed curious. When I first woke up, I was in a place I didn't recognize and surrounded by people I had never met. On top of that, the people there weren't human, but instead a race that I had never heard of, and to pile on even more, I quickly learned that I was far away from home and had no conceivable way to return anytime soon or at all. At that time, what I sought the most was anything familiar. If I hadn't been stuck in the Grigori, then Japan and its gods would have probably been the familiarity that I would have sought out, but in the end, the familiarity I found was not what I was expecting. It was Azazel's personality and pervertedness that served as an anchor that helped keep me in one piece. He saw Gabriel's eyebrows furrow when he said that, obviously confused and not particularly happy about Azazel's pervertedness being his anchor. Back home I had 3 teachers. I guess it would be best to explain where I came from first. The place I am from is full of humans, except we can all use chakra. There was an era called the Warring Clan Age, which lasted around 200 years. After that came to an end due to Madara and Hashirama. 5 villages were formed before Hashirama distributed the Biju beings of pure chakra and malevolence to the other villages in a bid for peace. Hashirama and Madara had a falling out, and both died after that. All hell broke loose, leading to 3 world wars. So many people died, and it led to so much residue of hatred and resentment. My home is built around ninja, mercenaries, and assassins. We are trained from 8 to 12 before we become shinobi and are sent on missions. The day I was born, the strongest Biju, the Kyuubi, attacked the village and killed a lot of people. My father, the reigning leader, sealed it in me in hopes I would be viewed as a hero. I wasn't. My teacher in the academy, Iruka, originally didn't like me as almost all viewed me as the Kyuubi incarnate instead of a human being. Later he warmed up to me in my last year there. After I graduated, I went under the tutelage of Kakashi Haddock, who I later found out was my dad's student, though neither I nor the majority of the village knew I was the son of the 4th. He was supposed to teach me and my 2 teammates, but didn't do all that much. Later he ended up personally training one of my teammates and left me with someone else. Eventually, I met Jiraiya. He was the only teacher who didn't hate or despise me upon our first meeting, like Iruka, and trained me. Unlike Kakashi, Naruto realized he was rambling. His breathing was becoming more strained and uneven the more he delved into the old memories, even the ones from his stint in Team 7, the more he felt his throat constrict and eyes burn. He felt his body slightly tremble from chills despite the rather warm weather. His palms became clammy, and his chest started to hurt as if someone was pushing down on it. His eyes were now shut, trying to stave off the panic attack that he could feel was starting to cloud his mind. It was useless though, as it only got worse, and then it all disappeared as he felt 2 soft hands pulling his head down into the warm, comforting embrace of the woman sitting next to him as his head lay atop her chest. He froze slightly as a single thought ran through his mind. Soft. Gently running her hands through his hair, Gabriel used a portion of the sun that she controlled to calm him down and help him get his emotions under control. If it were anyone else, then Gabriel would not go so far as to hug them, especially not so close to her chest, but throughout his explanation of his home, to be more specific, the Warring Clan era and the war, she sensed so much sadness and grief. Despite not having participated in it nor having known anyone from that time personally, he still, at his core and deep in his soul, grieved for the people who lost their lives, enemies and allies, and felt sadness just briefly touching upon the topic. Gabriel believed she was finally starting to understand who he truly was at his core. He was a person who would grieve for the deaths of both enemies and allies, someone who would feel sadness over the death of anyone, no matter if he knew them or not. He was a person who would neglect his own pain and sadness if it meant helping others, and he was a person who would most likely tend to lean towards things such as self-sacrifice. Normally, if someone had such a bad reaction to old memories, I would not encourage deeper diving into them, but in this case, I believe talking about it would be best. I don't mind listening to you ramble on. If there is something that causes you pain, I will listen and help you. If there is something that makes you laugh, I will laugh with you. If something makes you grieve and feel sorrow, I will do it. But you so talk, let it all out and let me help you. Gabriel whispered in his ear as she continued her movements. She felt his breathing turn softer and slowly return to normal as his body slowly stopped shaking. She wasn't sure, but if she looked into his eyes, she would guess the pupils returned to the original size as well. She felt him move, most likely attempting to sit back up, though she stopped him and kept him leaning against her. It's alright, I can more easily calm you down with my magic like this. Plus, I've heard it is easier to confront problematic memories when one is comfortable and feels safe. Gabriel said without pausing in her stroking of his hair. I see Jiraiya was well he was an idiot but a lovable one, he was the great sage of Myaboku and one of the 3 legendary Sanins. He took over my training and taught me somewhat of a fighting style, since I had never been properly taught in the academy and was more of a clumsy brawler than anything else. He was supposedly planning on teaching me more, but with only a month he couldn't. Gabriel could feel his smile. These memories were far more pleasant. He wrote a series called Icha Paradise. It was just a porn book. He liked to proclaim himself to be a super pervert, not the super pervert. Gabriel could feel his shoulders shake as he chuckled slightly. He did not bother hiding that he was a pervert and got beaten up a lot when caught peeping. Though he was back on his feet seconds later, it was what made me gravitate towards Azazel and view him as an anchor. Azazel and Jiraiya's personalities seemed so similar that for a moment I thought they might have been the same person, plus the fact he was willing to take me in and mentor me without any real problems reminded me of Jiraiya. It was just so easy to ground myself by relying on Azazel. Without him, I probably would have broken down and never recovered. Back then I probably still would. Those two are the closest I have ever had to family. Naruto sighed as he felt his shoulders sag. The weight seemed to slightly lessen. I see, I think I can understand why you are working for him. You mentioned teammates, do you wish to tell me about them or the Baiges or the villagers in general? She asked, knowing they would most likely not get a chance to talk like this again for a few days or even longer, and wanting to get to know more about him. Haha, that's a whole other problem. Naruto chuckled mirthlessly as his expression continued to darken the more she mentioned before thinking about the best place to start, then quickly deciding his birth was the best point. Kyoto. Bali had to admit he was starting to get very annoyed. He had been wandering around Kyoto for almost an hour now looking for something, yet had failed to catch even a glimpse of it. He knew what he was looking for was in Kyoto due to some of his personal contacts, and he needed to find it soon before the chaos began. While this would have been easier if he had Naruto to help him with his sensory ability, he didn't want to get him involved in his plan just yet, as he knew Naruto would be the most difficult person to convince to side with him. Weaving through the crowds, Vali spread out his senses, hoping to catch a hint of the unmistakable chakra of the person he was seeking out. His steps paused as he noticed something different from the other yokai around him that swiftly disappeared, seeming almost rushed or flustered in its disappearance. Not that Vali could actually tell what emotion was behind it, he could only guess from what he knew about the person he believed it to originate from. Slipping away from the crowds and into a secluded alley, Vali paused in his movements and took the time to locate the chakra signature, knowing that if he rashly chased after it, they would have an easier time losing him, much like Naruto does in their forest spars. Luckily he had a lot of experience sensing chakra rather than mana, due to Naruto's belief that versatility triumphs over raw power, though he only started believing that after passing through the dimensional gap and getting Merlin's inheritance. Rather quickly he located the chakra and noticed that it was on the move and headed in a way that would make it easy for Vali to cut them off. Vali knew it would be easier just to activate his balance breaker and cut them off that way, but it would defeat the whole purpose of keeping a low profile and not getting caught by the yokai or Azazel. Kyoto. 1 hour later, she had noticed him. That was the only explanation as to why her seemingly reasonable movements had kept putting her out of his interception reach for over an hour now. His patience was starting to wear thin, he had no idea how long that group would wait before they would start with their plan. Quickly cutting around a corner, Vali easily scaled a nearby wall and landed on the roof, recognizing he would have to be a little brash if he wanted to get back in time. Jumping across the roofs, Vali noticed he was catching up with her and also noticed she was starting to move faster, confirming his guess that she knew he was chasing her. Using a bit of magic he quickly displaced his presence, making it seem like he was going to cut her off when he wasn't. It was something he had learned from watching Naruto use his shadow clones, though he could not do it as well as he couldn't use the clones. He quickly arrived at her location just as the magic wore off and his actual presence was revealed. He watched her tense up as he dropped to the ground behind her. Hell, he wasn't even able to get the first word out before the woman in front of him was lashing out at him with her claws, seemingly intent on bisecting him. Raising his hand, he let his sacred gear manifest on his arm to block the chakra-infused claws. His ears rang as a noise similar to someone's plate with a fork rang out in the alley when their respective attack-defense met. He noticed her flinch in pain as she shot backward and gently rubbed the ears atop her head. She wore an expression that easily conveyed her annoyance as she scanned his body with predatory yet wary eyes. "Don't you devils ever get tired of hunting me all the time?" The black-haired woman asked as she stretched her hands above her head, which only seemed to have the effect of, rather erotically, making her rather large chest strain against the fabric of her already rather revealing battle kimono that she was wearing. "Ah, please don't compare me to those idiotic beasts you have dealt with in the past." Vali scoffed as he slightly glared at the woman across from him, not even the slightest bit interested in her display, which was most likely meant to distract him if the annoyed task was anything to go by. "Besides, I don't even work or serve the devils, I work under someone else, but that's not the point." Bali said as he lowered his hand and relaxed his stance in a sign of peace. I want your help, I'm not here to fight you. He could see the disbelief and mocking expression on her face. Oh, you want my help? Well then just tell me what to do, and I will do. Oh great master. She mocked as she shifted into a rather familiar battle stance. One Naruto had learned while training to control nature's energy. Sorry Naruto, but this is going to take longer than I thought. He whispered to himself as he tensed and prepared to engage the now sage-infused woman before him. Well then, show me if you are as worth my time as I was led to believe, Misfortune Queen Kuroka Toho. And with that the two shot forwards fully intent on not losing. One for his pride and the other for her freedom. The Akai Castle Inner Garden 2.5 hours later. By now Naruto and Gabriel had been in the garden for almost 3 hours simply talking. Naruto had talked about his childhood, not fully getting over the trauma, but lessening it. He then talked about his time as a genin, while keeping the fact that he was from a different world a secret. While he enjoyed the company of Gabriel, his home was still his biggest secret, and he just couldn't bring himself to tell her just yet, though Gabriel could probably guess it if she thought about this conversation later and noticed some inconsistencies Naruto couldn't fully hide or explain. After he had finished talking and sat up, Gabriel finally let him go. Gabriel decided to tell him a bit about herself and her past. She didn't talk about her magic, since he already knew about it, but instead talked about the pre-humanity age and talked about her likes, dislikes, and the things or activities she wanted to do soon. He had also learned why she didn't seem as burdened as Merlin had described her, and the answer was quite simple. Naruto admired her beauty, and Gabriel was aware of that, but he did not have any lustful desires or anything similar and simply wanted to get to know her. Of course, she could still feel the remnant lust from some of the more instinctive yakai, but it was easier to ignore so far away from everyone. For the first time in a long time, Naruto wasn't worried about anything. Even back in Konoha he still never got to truly relax all that often as he was on missions or something big was happening in the village. Over the past few years in the Grigori, Naruto had either been mastering Merlin's gift or going on jobs for Azazel, so this was a nice reprieve. Even so, he wasn't so relaxed as to completely let his guard down and had constantly kept his sensory abilities active, both his emotional one and the one from the sage, which was probably the only thing that made him able to react when he suddenly felt a massive amount of malice a few feet behind him and a massive buildup of unstable magic. Faintly in the back of his head, he felt something seemed to respond to his situation like someone gently brushed against his mind or consciousness. Before he had even realized his body was moving, his hand was on Gabriel's arm and Naruto was already flashing away toward the closest and safest Hiration that was in the castle. He felt Gabriel's muscles finish tensing as soon as his hand landed on her arm, indicating that she sensed the same thing, if only a little slower than him when it came to instinctual reaction, though that was most likely due to the different ways they were taught to fight. Quickly everything was consumed by gold as Naruto felt the heat from the explosion glance his skin before it vanished just as it appeared, and Naruto and Gabriel found themselves standing in a moderate-sized room with 4 other people, those being Azazel, Barakiel, Michiel, and Dulio, 2 of whom tensed up and summoned weapons when they heard the explosion outside. Both Dulio and Michiel were surprised to see Naruto and Gabriel appear, but quickly brushed it off, simply relieved that Gabriel was alright. What happened? Azazel asked while looking at Naruto. I'm not sure. We were in the garden talking, and then someone was suddenly behind us wielding a large amount of dangerously unstable magic. Naruto explained as his eyebrows furrowed in annoyance and confusion. But the problem is I didn't even notice anyone else had entered the garden until the magic was already collapsing in on itself, and that also includes me not sensing any magic build up till the very last moment. He said with annoyance starting to seep into his tone. Naruto wasn't a boastful person, but he did truly pride himself on 2 things. The first was his skill in direct fights, and the other was his sensory abilities. Thus the fact that someone seemed to effortlessly sneak up on him and almost kill him without being noticed was extremely annoying. That's concerning, Azazel muttered as he knew just how good a sensor Naruto was. Out of the corner of his eye, he could also see Barakiel shift worriedly. What are the statuses of those in the castle that you have marked over the last few days? Azazel questioned as Michiel finished questioning Gabriel and getting an almost identical answer, who was still standing near Naruto. Most of the royal guard is near the room in which the devils and Yasakaheim are having their meeting. Vali is still in town and seems to be fine, and others appear to already be making preparations. He suddenly paused before a flash of confusion colored his expression. Did I miscount? He whispered as he quickly brushed against all the marks that he had inside and around the castle. How did I not notice this earlier? 5, 6, 7 times, he must have recounted more than 10 times before Azazel grabbed his shoulder and his focus snapped back to the people in the room. Did something happen? Azazel questioned with an uneasy tone to his voice. It was rare for Naruto to lose focus in a situation such as this one. They're missing. was his simple response. What's missing surprisingly, it was Michiel who asked the question as Azazel already had an inkling of what Naruto was talking about. The Hiration marks that I left on certain people almost 12 are missing. Naruto explained with shock coloring his tone. Hiration? Michiel questioned. One of my techniques, Naruto responded simply. But even if the bearer of a mark dies the mark should still be there just harder to reach, but right now it's as if they never existed. Naruto muttered, choosing not to actually explain his ability. The only way that's possible is if someone has studied the mark, but I always remove them once I'm done to make sure no one has the chance, unless no, that's not possible only someone from the way. As he continued to talk, he kept getting quieter and quieter, until the other in the room couldn't even make out what he was saying, though Azazel had a guess. We can address that concern later. For now, we need to figure out who's attacking and why they are doing so. Azazel said as he snapped Naruto back to reality once again. For now, can you check on all those who have been marked and see, or feel, how they are doing? Brady abruptly paused, something that put both Azazel and Michiel on guard. He knew what he was sensing was wrong, there was no way one of them could be here or in this world for that matter, but it simply was impossible for anything else to feel so similar to it, and that's when he sensed it. Like a malevolent, slimy beacon radiating arrogance and dark twisted amusement, it was a chakra signature that stirred a dark hatred in his heart. Before he even fully processed it, he was already flashing, building up the chakra necessary to flash to that mark, the mark of a kunai not his own. Faintly he felt a hand land on his arm, only one person close enough to react, but dismissed it in favor of rushing to that presence. Once again the gold appeared and disappeared in a flash as he was now standing in one of the many open spaces of the castle. Looking around he saw bodies, both yokai and other races, piled around the area. Yet his eyes immediately looked for one presence that he despised more than anything else. There he was, sitting atop a small pile of corpses with an amused expression as he gazed back at Naruto with those dark, cruel snake-like eyes. Still dressed the same as when he saw him during the Chunin exams, he twirled the Hiration kunai on his finger with languid ease and precision. Every time I see you, you remind me more and more of your father, dear Naruto-kun. The man spoke with a voice that sent shivers of fear down Naruto's spine. The easiest way to describe it was as if a massive amount of malice and deceit were taken and made into a voice perfectly fit for the serpentine-like man sitting regally upon the corpses. He felt Gabriel gently squeeze his arm, having reacted so quickly as she felt his emotions drop before the chakra alerted the others in the room earlier. He knew Azazel would be mad later, but he couldn't be bothered with caring right now. The words dripped with so much venom that even Naruto was surprised it came out of his mouth. He did not blame Sasuke, he could not forgive him, but also didn't blame him. He didn't blame Itachi for forcing Sasuke down the path he was on, or Kakashi for neglecting to train him in favor of Sasuke alone, or anyone else. There was only a single person he blamed for all his problems, from the day before he became a genin all the way till he was sent to a completely new world. There was only a single person to blame in Naruto's mind. Orochimaru.